few months ago in a maze, a young boy trembling with anxiety recounted that those who didn't choose to retreat immediately when confronted by the boss, or those greedy individuals who prioritized personal gain, were met with death. The boy looked around and saw injured people lying scattered on the ground. He went on to say that this was exactly what he had seen, and wondered if they were still alive when a monster appeared before him. The monster stood opposite the boy and stared at him, making him think it was the floor boss, and he trembled with fear. He recalled that the injured had been knocked unconscious with just one blow from the monster. The boy said that with just one blow, everyone was knocked out. That was the power of the floor boss. They needed to get out of here, but he didn't know how. He wondered whether he should flee while taking the other three with him, or try to buy time until rescue arrived, but then realized neither option was feasible. He thought there was only one way left. He had to prepare himself and call himself Wim Strauss. Wim then used Switch Puppenspieler, and he thought that after finishing his spell he could escape alone. That thought flashed through his mind. The dragon's wings. They had accepted someone like him as a teammate, and he had acquired them. He thought about all the days he had spent with them. The monster lunged to attack, while Wim continued to think that this was the most important moment of his life, and he felt a little proud that he had thought of it that way. At the Dragon's Wings house, the other members cornered Wim. Meanwhile, Wim, trembling, asked them why, and said that something strange was happening. The male member told Wim not to make him repeat himself, then drew his sword and pointed it at him. This male member is Kronos, the leader of Dragon's Wings, and he further told Wim that he had told him to get lost. Nikor, the priest, said that was obvious, while Mylis, the sorceress, remarked that Wim had truly gotten the better side this time. Nicker went on to say that just because Wim delivered the final blow to take down the floor boss, he was acting like a hero. At this point, Kronos told Wim that it was his magic sword, and Mylis' magic that had cornered the boss, and then asked him if he considered it his own achievement. Wim stammered nervously, saying he'd never thought of it that way, that it was a victory for the whole group. He recounted how he'd miraculously defeated the floor boss. It truly was a miracle. He thought everyone would praise him. Wim wondered why things had come to this point, while Mylis remarked that his buffs were truly lacking, a point Kronos agreed with, saying it was all Wim's fault, leaving him utterly disappointed. He thought that from the very beginning, they had never truly accepted him. He knelt down and said he was sorry for what he had done. But Dragon's Wings is the only place he has. No one else will hire a grand tour like him. He'll do his best not to cause any more trouble. So please let him stay. This is the only place he belongs. Kronos stared at Wim. Then he replied, "Then do it this way. If you can beat him in a fight, he'll let you stay." Wim was shocked to hear that and thought, how could someone who isn't a professional fighter like me possibly defeat a warrior like Kronos? Wim muttered that he would need another miracle and forced a nervous smile. Kronos became furious, shouting at the boy what he was laughing at. Then he grabbed Wim by the neck and shoved him against the wall, causing Wim to groan in pain. Kronos yelled that he was a useless person who only knew how to use a few low-level buffs. So you shouldn't disobey the leader's orders. Nicker anxiously tried to dissuade Kronos, warning him that if he continued, things would get worse, but before she could finish, she was interrupted when Kronos threw Wim to the ground and berated him, calling him a weakling. Kronos cursed angrily and wondered how on earth such a weakling could have defeated the floor boss. Sitting slumped on the floor, Wim coughed incessantly and thought that even though he had risked his life for them, the members of Dragon's Wings, those who had taken him in when he was just a menial worker, he simply wanted to repay them. At that moment, a girl walked into the room, leaving Wim bewildered and unsure of what was happening. The girl stared at Wim, while he, bewildered, asked her who she was. Kronos then introduced her as Sophia, who would be joining the team in his place. He added that she would be a valuable asset to fill the void that Wim would leave. Kronos held Wim by the head and kept insisting that he not be made to repeat himself. Then he flashed a cruel smile and told Wim to get out, that they didn't need him anymore. Wim was completely stunned, speechless. Wim then recounted that Full Brown was a labyrinthine city, a place that held the dreams and hopes of young adventurers. A city thrives on the gifts that come from the labyrinth, and on the people who venture into it in search of them. A vendor was explaining to a customer that this magic stone was a top-grade material, sourced from the 60th floor. Wim went on to recount that the labyrinth was filled with treasures of gold and silver and rare monster materials. And there are landscapes that cannot be found on the surface. The dangerous and unexplored areas of the labyrinth are endless. Fame and status are directly proportional to pioneering achievements, something that is certain to come to those who venture forth. And the bond between those who have crossed the line between life and death together is stronger than even blood ties. Those who dare to risk their lives to explore the labyrinth are called explorers. Thinking about being banished by Kronos, Wim muttered that he wished he could die. He knew for sure that there were still jobs at the Adventurers Guild, but the job of a Grand Tour wasn't in high demand, and he doubted any crew would hire him at this time. You could hunt some weak monsters like in the old days. No, maybe some mid-tier team would accept you. No, you shouldn't think too highly of yourself. A rank F team would probably be a better fit. Wim stopped in front of a pub, pulled a few coins out of his pocket, and told himself that at times like these, he had to drink. He walked into the shop, and someone inside greeted him. Inside, a bartender smiled when she recognized Wim, who greeted her back. "Good afternoon, Greta." Greta said she heard that Dragon's Wings had just defeated a floor boss and congratulated him, then offered him a glass of wine. The others in the bar also congratulated Wim and asked him, the world #1, if he was planning to treat them to a meal today. Greta cheerfully added that if the Adventurers Guild confirmed the results of the boss-killing operation at the scene, she believed he would be promoted to a higher-level squad, and then asked if he was celebrating today. But Wim just shook his head and replied, no. He forced a smile and said that for now he just wanted a beer and sausages as usual. While eating, Wim thought the food wasn't very good, probably because of what had happened, and then he chuckled softly. But then he quickly covered his mouth with his hand. Wim recalled that he wasn't allowed to laugh like that. Kronos had told him to stop because it looked disgusting. But Wim was no longer a member of Dragon's Wings. He looked around the cafe, recalling how the whole group used to celebrate together, but he himself wasn't good at striking up conversations with others. Even so, he realized that it had been really fun at the time. Now there was no place for him there anymore. Thinking that, he bowed his head and buried his face in the plate. Greta looked at Wim anxiously, but suddenly the doorbell rang and someone called his name. A girl entered through the pub door and approached him, while Wim, astonished, called out her name as Haida Marie and wondered why she was there. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, a man reported to the guildmaster that they had examined the body of the floor leader, commonly known as the giant crocodile who had been defeated by the Dragon's Wings team. The leader asked about the situation, and the man replied that, according to reports, all 4 members of the group had joined forces to defeat the monster. However, the chairman asked if there was any problem. The man explained that they had examined the wounds on the gang leader's body, and that most of the injuries, including the finishing blow, were caused by a machete. This person added that there were also wounds caused by magic and swords, but he didn't think those were serious enough to cause serious injury. Upon hearing this, the guildmaster remarked that the only member of Dragon's Wings who used a machete was Wim Strauss. Then the guildmaster asked the man if he meant that a non-professional fighter, a Grand Tour, had defeated a floor boss using only his own strength. Some time ago, Haida Marie sat alone looking at a map and wondering why Wim's location marker had moved away from Dragon's Wings to a cheap inn. She asked for the location of the listening device, then picked it up and said, "Here it is," before activating it. Kronos' voice recorder was shouting, "Get out, you piece of trash," enraging Haida Marie, who exclaimed, "How dare Kronos speak like that to her Wim?" Back in the present, Haida Marie calls out Wim's name while Greta greets her. Greta suspiciously asked if this was the stalker girl, S-chan, which angered Haida Marie. She insisted she wasn't S-chan, but Haida Marie, even though her name didn't have an S, and then called Greta the cowherd girl. Greta, confused, asked, "What does herding cows mean?" and seemed not to understand the implication, which irritated Haida Marie, who retorted, "Go die." Then she said that she hadn't come here for that reason, and then turned to ask Wim if he was okay. Wim wondered if she was referring to Dragon's Wings and asked Haida Marie if the rumors had already spread. She replied that she hadn't and that only she knew. Wim then asked how she knew about it. Haida Marie replied that she knew everything about Wim. This completely shocked him, and he asked her how she knew. Haida Marie explained that it was because they came from the same village. Wim pondered for a moment, then said that perhaps that made sense. Greta asked Haida Marie if anything was wrong, and if anything had happened to Wim, but Haida Marie hesitated and didn't say anything. Wim felt embarrassed and awkwardly said that he really didn't know what to say, but he had actually been kicked out of Dragon's Wings. The people in the pub overheard it by chance, and were all surprised. One man asked why he was kicked out when his team was almost certain to be promoted. Another said he was just doing menial tasks, while another commented that he had heard about the other 3, but hadn't heard anything about Wim since. Wim replied that they hadn't even given him time to prepare. but he had kept the paperwork ready in case he needed it, so he thought everything would be fine. He also said that Sophia seemed good at it, and that she might finally be able to do what he had done. Hidemarie asks Wim about Sophia and whether she is his replacement. Wim confirms and says that she is a beautiful fairy. Hidemarie angrily says that Kronos has yet another girl, but Wim asks her not to say so and admits that it's probably true. Wim thinks that the atmosphere at the time actually suggested it. If only he could have built up a little more self-confidence, perhaps things would have been different. He chuckled softly, which caught Hidemarie's attention, and she asked him if he still hadn't broken that habit. Wim was confused, and Hidemarie noted that his laughter made her uncomfortable. Wim quickly apologized and asked her if it was disgusting, but she replied that it wasn't. Hidemarie went on to say that she liked his laugh and remembered how he used to correct her mistakes. Hearing this, Wim asked her what she meant, telling her that she shouldn't express her feelings for someone so easily. He asked her what if he misunderstood. Hidemarie blushed and replied that it was fine if he thought so, then continued eating her food. Wim took a big gulp of beer and told Hidemarie to stop. But Hidemarie commented that she didn't understand why Wim was expelled, saying that he had defeated the floor boss all by himself. Wim nearly choked upon hearing this and wondered what Hidemarie meant. Hidemarie explained that normally Dragon's Wings wouldn't be able to defeat the floor boss, yet he had done it. Could he be the one who had done it? Wim was shocked to hear this and shouted that it was a misunderstanding, that he was only the one delivering the finishing blow. Wim added that he thought it was just a coincidence that he defeated the boss, all thanks to the others who had inflicted damage on it. However, Hidemarie said that she didn't think so. She explained that it was just her speculation, but she didn't think the floor boss had taken any damage other than Wim's attacks. Therefore, defeating the floor boss could be considered Wim's solo achievement. Wim exclaimed, "No, that's impossible. Hidemarie is overestimating me." The other three were all exceptionally talented, and he was simply trying his best not to cause them any trouble. Wim wondered why Hidemarie thought so highly of him. Hidemarie replied that she thought so because... But Greta interrupted her, calling Hidemarie S-chan. Greta said that she was born and raised in Full Brown, and had never heard of anyone being able to defeat the floor boss alone. Greta added that Hidemarie shouldn't use her stalking habit to fabricate stories and say strange, unpleasant things. Hearing this, Hidemarie angrily shouted, "What?" Then asserted that she said that because she had overheard the conversation through a listening device. Greta responded that she had gone too far. Seeing Greta and Hidemarie arguing, Wim spoke up to explain that the reason he was expelled was his own fault and a loss of trust. This only angered Hidemarie further, and she yelled at Wim to stop his weak-willed attitude. Turning to Greta, she called her the cowherd girl and then loudly demanded a glass of beer. Greta mentioned that Hidemarie wasn't a good drinker, but Hidemarie retorted that she didn't care and demanded that he pour her some immediately. Greta put her beer glass down and commented that she was starting again. Then, Hidemarie, with a glass of wine in her hand, began to speak about the conflicting perceptions within her. Soon she collapsed, her face pressed against the table. Then Greta told Hidemarie that she had only finished her first glass, but Hidemarie yelled at her to shut up and gave her another glass. Wim said that was enough drinking for the day, but Hidemarie told him to take this and handed him a card. Wim looked at the card, while Hidemarie explained that it was her business card. In his mind, Wim immediately thought of Nachtleibel, the strongest high-ranking team in Full Brown, comprised of members of high status, and of course, with an extremely rigorous selection process. Hidemarie was recruited there and quickly made a name for himself early in his career. She told Wim that he should come to their team's house tomorrow. Wim asked what she wanted him to do. Hidemarie told him to try working with them for a while just to gain experience, and she would vouch for him. Wim was astonished and asked if she could really do that. Hidemarie replied that although they didn't look alike, she was the 74th sage and also a candidate for the next high-ranking leadership position, so it was simple for her. It was dark outside, shrouded in darkness, and Hidemarie was lying on Wim's back. He thanked Greta for the meal while she asked if he was okay and if he should use his body enhancement, which made Wim laugh. He replied that Grantor was indeed weak, but that wasn't a problem. Then Greta warned him that there were many drunken adventurers walking around at this hour, so he should be careful. Wim replied that he would be mindful. Wim walked down the street, muttering to himself that even though Hidemarie was willing to vouch for him, he wondered if someone like him was suitable to join Nachtleibel. He had a feeling the other members of the group would have a bad impression of him if he actually did. Wim added that he was sure someone like him would only cause trouble there, and eventually Hidemarie might end up hating him. Suddenly, Wim saw two men in front of him smashing bottles. One of them said he hadn't hit a single one and was drinking alcohol. The other person commented that when it was his turn, he also missed, while Wim started to walk past. But when the men saw Wim passing by, one of them stopped and asked him what he was and what he was carrying. The man suddenly recognized Haida Marie and exclaimed that he knew it. She was the thief from the other day. Wim was shocked to hear this and asked, "Thief?" The man explained that Haida Marie had bought all the snow cakes they had been waiting in line for at the store. The other man shouted that there were even limited edition ones among them. Hearing this, Wim thought that he was very sorry about it, but calling her a thief was a bit much. One of the two men yelled at Wim, telling him to wake her up immediately and demanding an apology. Wim was confused and didn't know what to do, while the man continued to yell, asking why he was so quiet, and the other man asked if he didn't understand what they were saying. When one of the two men tried to touch Haida Marie and yelled at him to wake her up, Wim immediately used his pump-up Zweimal, instant enhancement skill ×2, and disappeared from his current location. The two men were bewildered, not knowing what had happened. One of them asked, "Where did he go?" But immediately they saw Wim appear on the stairs above. Wim bowed his head in apology on behalf of Haida Marie for what she had done, saying that she had also shared some of the snow cake with him that day. The two men were stunned, and Wim thought to himself, "This is bad. They seem even angrier." He quickly excused himself and left. At that moment, the other two began talking about Haida Marie, realizing that she was from Aniclimax, the girl with the two braids. One person asked the other if they had seen what the boy had just done, but the other said they hadn't and wondered if the boy was also a member of Aniclimax. While escaping from the two drunk men, Wim stopped and breathed a sigh of relief, saying that they were indeed drunk, but since he had made it this far, they should be all right. When Wim heard Haida Marie whispering something, he asked if she was awake and if she could walk. Haida Marie replied that she couldn't walk, which made Wim smile and remember her promise to take care of him, so he could just take his time and continue walking. Just a few hours earlier at the pub, Wim had thought that someone like him joining Aniclimax was a far-fetched idea. Haida Marie is a strong candidate for the next high-level leadership position, and what's more, she possesses a rare profession, sage. She's a good person, always chatting with someone like you. He couldn't cause her any more trouble, but Haida Marie grabbed Wim's shoulder and told him to go ahead, which surprised him. She went on to say that Wim has unlimited potential, and that if he joined Aniclimax, he would discover who he truly is. She added that he should live his life the way he wants. Returning to the present, Wim thanked Haida Marie for being there for him during his most difficult time. He said he wasn't sure if he should say this, but Haida Marie should also live freely. She doesn't need to feel any responsibility or obligation towards him. Hearing this, she called out his name and insisted that it wasn't like that she wasn't doing this out of any sense of obligation or debt. Wim then asked what their relationship was. Haida Marie awkwardly replied that it would be best if Wim didn't find out. He asked confused why, and she replied that it was because she knew everything about him, which stunned Wim. Aniclimax is the highest-ranking group with over 100 members, and 30% of the floor managers have been defeated by this group. Wim paced anxiously back and forth in front of Aniclimax's headquarters, wondering if it was really okay for him to be here. A man noticed him and thought there was a suspicious person lurking nearby. The man approached and asked what he needed, causing Wim to start trembling and feel awkward, not knowing what to say. Worried, Wim took something out of his pocket, making the man think it was a weapon, so he immediately prepared to fight. But then Wim just pulled out a business card and said that Haida Marie had given it to him. The man was taken aback when he saw the card and hesitantly asked if he was a friend of Haida Marie's. Shortly afterwards, Haida Marie appeared and welcomed Wim to Aniclimax, while Wim was surprised by the sight inside. He thought to himself that this place was amazing, more like a mansion than a team's home. Haida Marie showed him where the dining hall was, where the training room was, and as for that other place. But before she could finish, another person approached. It was the same man from earlier. He apologized for what had happened, and said that Wim didn't look like the picture he'd been told about him. Wim replied that it was all right, that it was his fault for looking suspicious. But the man refused to take responsibility and insisted that he was not at fault at all. Haida Marie then called the man by the name Abel and asked him how he could have made such a mistake. Abel replied that it was because she had called him a courageous man. Haida Marie blushed and shouted that she had never said that. She swore she hadn't said it at all. In embarrassment, she awkwardly walked toward a door and told Wim that the entrance was this way. Then she and Wim entered a crowded hall with many people already inside. Approaching a woman, Marie cheerfully said that she had brought Wim along and called her Camilla. Camilla smiled and said she understood. Wim thought to himself that this woman was the leader of Aniclimax, the silver-haired Camilla. She is one of the strongest warriors in Fullbrow. Camilla approached Wim and remarked that he was smaller than she had expected. Immediately afterwards, she covered her mouth and said that it was impolite to say that, because she had heard that he was a handsome and masculine young man. Marie instantly shouted in embarrassment that she hadn't said that at all. Camilla then welcomed Wim to Aniclimax, and Wim shook her hand, introducing himself as a former member of Dragon's Wings who had been laid off. His name was Wim Strauss. He said he was very happy to meet her, and secretly thought that the strength of her handshake was incredible. Camilla said that Marie had told her about him, and that at Aniclimax they always welcome talented people. However, when Camilla asked what role he played at Dragon's Wings, Wim became worried and replied that because he didn't have much mana, he usually did general tasks like searching for enemies, administrative work, and other miscellaneous tasks. Camilla was puzzled by this. Administrative work? Marie quickly said that he didn't need to tell unnecessary things, but Wim insisted that it was true. Camilla smiled and said that this time they were just scouting for the upcoming dive, and she would need him behind to observe and spot enemies. Wim froze when he heard the word dive and shouted, asking what was happening. Marie then reminded him that she had already told him. This was for him to gain experience. Wim panicked, shouting that this was too soon. He had never gone on a dive with so many people before, but Marie reassured them that everything would be all right. They just needed to enter the labyrinth. Wim and the others gathered in front of a crystal ball, from which a magic circle formed on the ground. Wim recounts that the labyrinth was navigated using teleportation rings located on each floor. Upon defeating the floor boss, new teleportation points will appear, and depending on the circle used, they may even be able to skip multiple floors at once. As they walked through the labyrinth, Marie suddenly stopped and called out to Wim. She apologized and gave him a scarf, asking him to wear it for a while. Marie explained that they were about to use a special teleportation tunnel that Aniclimax was keeping secret. Since Wim was still an outsider, they needed to be blindfolded when passing through it. But Wim interrupted her and said that it was fine, that it was only natural, especially when it came to information about teleportation loops that could skip multiple floors, which was a huge advantage over other teams. After putting on the blindfold, Marie told Wim to follow her and said he should hold her hand. Wim agreed and took her hand. Marie teased that holding her hand in public like this was quite bold. Wim immediately blushed and shouted that it wasn't like that, he hadn't seen anything. Marie replied that she didn't mind, but Wim yelled at her to stop teasing him. Wim recounted that they subsequently used the secret teleportation ring several times. Upon reaching floor 97, Wim thought it was indeed Aniclimax. He hadn't expected them to reach this floor so quickly. This was the true power of a high-ranking team. Suddenly, Wim began to worry and said that things weren't good. He didn't think he could be of any help at Aniclimax. His abilities were limited. All he ever did at Dragon's Wings was observe and imitate what he heard. With such a large and talented group, he was just a burden. Camilla asked what he was muttering about, and Marie explained that he was just nervous because it was his first time, and besides, he was a very cautious person. Camilla smiled and said that being cautious was a good thing. Camilla took Wim's arm and explained that it wasn't good for him to be so stressed, then called him little boy. Wim agreed awkwardly. She went on to say that he had dived to this floor before with the B-rank team, Dragon's Wings, and moreover, he was the one who had defeated the floor boss before them, so there was no need to worry. She added that the main goal for today was simply to create a map, so he just needed to do what he could. Hearing this, Wim was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. He softly replied that he understood and thought to himself how kind Camilla was, almost making him cry. Marie chimed in, saying that everyone at Aniclimax was a good person, so he should take his time getting to know them. Wim nodded in agreement. A moment later, Wim suddenly panicked and hastily turned around to look behind him. Marie anxiously asked if anything was wrong, but he simply replied that nothing was wrong, that he just thought he'd heard something, and that it might just have been his imagination. She asked in astonishment if it was a sign of some kind of trap, then said that she thought he should report it. Wim reassured himself that it wasn't like that there was something strange about this feeling, but he would still expand his search area as a precaution. Wim then used his magic to inspect the entire surrounding area. Marie suggested that if he discovered anything, he should use telepathy to let Camilla know, and Wim agreed with her. In another part of the labyrinth, Camilla and the other members of her team were descending the stairs. Suddenly she heard Wim's voice, asking permission to disturb her and inquiring if she could spare him some time. Camilla asked what was wrong. Wim reported that he suspected there might be a rockfall trap to the upper left, about 45 meters away, just a short distance from them. Camilla asked if he was sure about the rockfall trap. Wim replied that he was 90% sure, but there might be a delay in activation. Camilla said that she didn't care about the percentage and asked that next time if he detected anything, he should use the public communication channel to inform everyone. Wim agreed, secretly thinking that only large teams had such a team-wide communication system, which made him even more nervous. Shortly afterward, an announcement was made on the public channel stating that a rockfall trap was likely to appear in the front left, with an estimated weight of approximately 150 kilograms, shaped like a stone column. This information came as a complete shock to all the team members. Seeing everyone's surprised reactions, Wim wondered what was going on and whether he had messed things up. Meanwhile, Camilla stated publicly that if that were all, Abel could handle it. Abel replied that this was Abel and that he would handle it. Abel approached the suspected trap, and just as he arrived, a large rock fell down. He quickly caught it, preventing himself from being hit. Later, Abel announced on public channels that the trap had been defused. Camilla praised him for doing a good job, and she added that the situation perfectly matched the description. The other members of Aniclimax were extremely surprised. They asked if it was really possible for him to do that, and said they had never heard of such a trap-detecting ability, let alone predicting its shape. Some people suspected it might just be a coincidence, then wondered if it was the power of one of the people from Dragon's Wings. Wim anxiously asked Marie what he should do, wondering if he had gotten himself into trouble. But Marie confirmed that he had, but in a good way. She said that people were realizing Wim's normality was actually anything but normal. He then went on to search the traps again and again, proving that what happened wasn't just a coincidence. Then, one of the Aniclimax members wondered what that guy from Dragon's Wings was up to. Another said it was Jim Strauss, and a third added that he was using his advanced enemy-finding skill as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Camilla commented that Dragon's Wings with only 4 members had become a B-tier team in just a few years. She wondered why she had never heard of this boy, despite his advanced search skills, and why he had been expelled. Was there something wrong with him? Just then, Wim's voice came through the communication channel, calling Camilla and announcing that it was him. Camilla asked him what was wrong, and Wim replied that the humidity was rising. He added that they hadn't seen any lower-level winged insects in a while. Camilla asked what that meant, and Wim explained that he believed they had entered the territory of a giant monster. It's very likely the territory of Great Tortoise Zeraton. This is a highly hostile monster, but it's entirely possible to avoid it by taking a slightly longer route. Camilla asked if he was sure, and Wim replied that he was 90% certain. Camilla told Wim that she knew he was cautious, but as she had said before, when there was a high probability, he should use a public communication channel to report. Hearing this, Wim panicked and quickly apologized to Camilla. He thought to himself that he had made another mistake, and he didn't know what to do next. Camilla went on to say that she wanted to leave the search to Simon, while Wim stepped forward. She wanted his assistance in the upcoming battle. Hearing this, Wim thought to himself, "Oh no, he's just been removed from the search mission because of his mistake." Camilla went on to say that she had decided there was no need to avoid Great Tortoise Zeraton. They would fight it, and she wants to see his potential as a Grand Tour winner. Hearing that, Wim became even more worried, thinking that if he made another mistake this time, there would be nowhere else for him. But he still told Camilla that he understood and would try his best. Deep down, Wim sadly thought that he had to make sure he didn't make any more mistakes. At that moment, Marie silently watched him from behind, then opened the communication channel and called Camilla. Marie asked Camilla if she could accompany Wim and said that she was used to his buffing skills, and no one could support him better than her at this moment. Camilla smiled in agreement, saying she was thinking the same thing, and told Marie to go ahead and take good care of him. Wim apologized to Marie for bothering him, but she excitedly said that now was the time for him to show himself. Wim recounted that his ideal in life was to be unassuming, to help others when needed. He lived a secluded life and sought to contribute quietly. That was the path he believed he should take. He glanced furtively at a giant turtle monster ahead with a worried expression. Marie stood next to Wim, urging him to hurry, saying they should act while the turtle was busy eating. She showed him that everyone was watching, and this was the perfect opportunity for him to show them who he really was. Looking towards Camilla and the others in the Nacht crew, Wim thought to himself that they were watching him. To atone for his previous mistake, he had to make sure he didn't cause any more trouble for Nacht. Wim said that he really didn't know what to do. After just one day of being with everyone, he realized how inexperienced he was at coordinating with such a large group. No matter how hard he tried, he would still make mistakes, especially since Haida Marie had gone to so much trouble for him. She called his name when she saw him falter. Wim started to say that someone like him. But Haida Marie interrupted him, saying that they would use Ice Spear and he just needed to support her by buffing her as usual. She was ready to enter the battle, and Wim thought to himself, yes, this feeling was familiar. They had dived together, just the two of them, before, and he felt relieved. He happily thanked Haida Marie and said that he was fine now. She smiled in response, saying that this was the Wim she knew. She then drew her weapon and declared that it was time to show everyone what they were truly capable of. Win felt confused and asked Haida Marie if the magic stone was shrinking, to which she explained that she wasn't the only one whose size had decreased, and it also tripled the magical density. Win exclaimed that it was exactly as he had thought. Haida Marie yelled, "Okay, they should do it," and used the generate spell to attack the monster. The monster stared intently at them, while one of the group exclaimed that the giant turtle had taken notice of them. A spear appeared from above, and Wim began to recount that any mage who didn't understand the situation would be stunned to witness this. Haida Marie's magic is activated based on principles entirely different from common magic today. This is only possible if the user possesses a rare profession called Sage. There are two types of magic: basic magic and applied magic. Basic magic consists of spells that anyone can use, such as transmitting messages, locating enemies, etc. Applied magic, on the other hand, refers to special spells that can only be used depending on one's profession, such as warrior, mage, priest, grantor, etc. Wim went on to recount that sages were considered the most powerful profession because they could use all kinds of magic. Furthermore, they also have the ability to create the basic building blocks of magic to create new spells. At that moment, Haida Marie shouted out her approval. She officially accepted the gift from Grantor Wim Strauss. Wim replied that he accepted and immediately activated the solid and frozen magic, connecting with the spear hovering high above. As the team members watched intently, Camilla thought that Wim had enhanced the magic of the attacker's attack. Meanwhile, Wim shouted to activate enchant, and the monster began charging straight towards Wim and Haida Marie. She realized and exclaimed that it was heading in the right direction, then gestured, and Wim responded that he understood. They both shouted Ice Spear, and the ice spear pierced through the monster. All the team members were stunned. Meanwhile, a strong gust of cold wind blew through, blurring their vision. The monster was defeated, and Haida Marie shivered, saying it was too cold, causing Wim to quickly apologize, saying that the magical output this time was higher than he expected. Haida Marie told Wim that it was okay because he had finally shown his abilities. Wim asked if she really thought so. Immediately afterwards, Haida Marie shouted, asking Camilla what she thought. "Isn't Wim wonderful?" Camilla stood still, saying nothing, only gently brushing the dust off her armor. Wim began to worry, wondering if he had done something wrong again. But then Camilla spoke up, saying she had just received a message from Simon. He had spotted a wyvern. They would start setting up camp there, and Wim was instructed to use a buff on the shield unit. Camilla added that she wanted to see his defensive buffing abilities. Wim replied that he understood. Haida Marie secretly thought she quite liked what she had just witnessed, but Wim disagreed, saying that wasn't the case. Camilla was only giving him one more chance, so next time he had to try his best. Haida Marie was slightly disappointed to hear that and complained that he was doing it again. But deep down, she was happy because now, except for him, most people were starting to realize how good Wim really was. So maybe that was okay. At that moment, the other members of the team started whispering, wondering if Haida Marie's ice spear had ever been this fast before. One person wondered about that strange grantor, and another replied that he was a friend of Haida Marie. What a peculiar fellow. Haida Marie suddenly stared at both members and asked if they had said anything. They fearfully replied that no, nothing. Then Abel approached Wim and said, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Abel, the squad leader. It's a pleasure to meet you." Wim thought to himself that Abel was the captain, which was amazing considering they were the same age. He replied that it was nice to meet him, But when Wim tried to shake Abel's hand, he started to panic, thinking he couldn't talk to strangers, not knowing what to say next. He pulled his hand back, surprising Abel, who asked if he was all right. Wim replied that he was fine, but inwardly he thought it was a disaster. Abel will find you terrible, will hate you, and then everything will go back to how it was before. However, contrary to expectations, Abel laughed and told him there was no need to be so stressed. That calmed Wim down. He thought to himself that Abel was so kind, and it warmed his heart. Then Abel said that he had heard Wim could strengthen their defenses, and apologized for not having much experience using buffs. Wim retorted that there must be some grand tour at Nacht Lebel. Abel replied that he had heard only one person had ever held that role before. Wim thought to himself, that makes sense, it's not a popular profession after all. Wim then explained that only if he could obtain the buff's approval could the Grand Tour activate the buff on the target. He added that grant magic is a type of magic that operates through consciousness, used to alter physical elements. For example, enhancing physical attributes such as weapons, body, hardness, lightness, strength, speed, or anything that extends beyond human sensation. Wim also added that the buff can only be applied if the target is truly willing to accept it. But then, a man interrupted him, his face stern and somewhat frightening, declaring that he didn't like buffs. This made Wim anxious and frightened. However, the man then said it was impolite to say that and introduced himself as Mark, asking if he could explain further. Mark went on to say that he used to dive with the Grand Tour, and each time he received a buff, his body felt different. There were times when he lost control of his body and couldn't act properly. Often, Grand Tour would also add all sorts of attributes, causing many unwanted effects. Wim was shocked to hear this, but reassured himself that he could only use basic level buffs, so nothing like that would happen. Wim went on to explain that he was using a rather complex combination of different buffs, so there was no need to worry about side effects. However, Mark became angry when he heard that, which frightened Wim. Mark asked if he thought he was a novice, then added that he knew a little about buffs himself, and wanted to hear a more detailed explanation. Wim was anxious and trembling, wondering if he had angered Mark and not knowing what to say next. Abel spoke up, saying that although he didn't have much experience, he wanted to learn and hoped to hear Wim explain things more clearly. Wim thought to himself, that's right, these are adventurers from Nacht Lebel, so it's not surprising that they have knowledge of other professions. He asked if they really wanted to hear it, then told them not to worry, because there would be no change in their feelings. Mark was confused by this, which caused Wim to fall silent for a moment. Mark asked him what he meant by saying there would be no changes, and whether such a buff actually existed. Wim happily replied that it was a characteristic of the Grand Tour skill he possessed, then asked if he was truly allowed to explain it. Mark agreed, and Wim happily said that this was the first time someone had asked him to explain his skills. First, he explained that the discrepancy in the effectiveness of buffs that many people discuss is due to the rusting method, which is a common method used in applied magic. The incantation method, on the other hand, is a way of casting spells where the incantation is fully and clearly established. Wim admitted that he wasn't very familiar with how other classes worked, but that was understandable. Abel interjected, saying that everyone's physical condition and strength are different, while Mark agreed, arguing that it's not something that can be generalized and applied to everyone. Wim smiled and said that, as they said, if one wasn't careful, a wrong buff could cause the recipient to break bones. In his heart, he thought to himself that he already knew. The people from Nacht Lebel were truly amazing. They even understood the principles of Grand Tour magic. Then Wim began chanting, Lorem ispum dolor sit amet, consectatur adipissing illit, and continued reciting everything he knew. Realizing he was talking too much, Wim awkwardly apologized and asked if he had been talking excessively. But Abel, Mark, and the others all smiled and replied that it was all right, perfectly fine. Wim went on to explain that thanks to this special buff skill, he could combine 7 defensive enchantments into a single spell, and even gather all 25 sensory-related enchantments into a single incantation. Hearing this, everyone began to feel tense and confused. Suddenly, Mark shouted that he understood. He really understood. Wim immediately realized that he had once again talked too much. Mark, with a stunned expression, said that it was incredible. Simply put, he could bestow dozens of buffs at once with just one spell. Wim humbly explained that it was a little different from the usual Grand Tours. Because he didn't have much magic power, he had to carefully divide and utilize the limited amount of magic he possessed. Mark said that, to be sure, he confirmed that their feelings would remain the same as usual. Wim replied that the only difference was the feeling that his body was improving. Mark nodded, saying that he understood. Immediately afterward, Mark solemnly read the blessing. I, Mark, approve the blessing of Grantor Wim Strauss. Wim asked in surprise if he was sure, and Mark confirmed this, adding that just that much knowledge alone shows how talented Wim is. Mark trusted him. That's what Wim thought when he heard Mark say that, and he thanked him from the bottom of his heart. Wim shouted that he would do his best, then activated his ultimate magic by summoning Enchant. At this moment, Abel and Mark are fighting. Wim stood watching the two of them, nervously asking how it felt. Mark replied that there was no need to say anything. It was a feeling he couldn't even put into words, his body moving more nimbly than even in his prime. Abel agreed with Mark, exclaiming that his body felt so light it was like a dream, unlike any ordinary buff. Mark shouted to Abel, telling them to try coordinating some kind of move. Meanwhile, the other members of the team yelled at Wim, urging him to hurry up and buff them too. Wim agreed and began casting buffs on each person. Then, standing behind Camilla, Wim announced that he had arrived. Camilla nodded, saying it was fine, then noticed Wim was trembling and asked if he was okay. Wim replied that it was always like that. Whenever something big was near him, he would tremble like that. Suddenly, a monster appeared, and Camilla immediately ordered the entire team to prepare for battle. The monster roared in anger, and Camilla warned the shield units that a breath attack was coming. She trusted them, and they all confirmed in unison, ready to fight. The monster spewed fire toward the shield units, but they easily blocked it with their shielding spell. The attack was deflected, causing the flames to bounce back towards the monster. Wim watched the scene in amazement, exclaiming, "That's amazing!" They've used reflection just as expected from Nachtliebel's shield units. Mark felt tense and asked Abel if they had actually used reflection, and Abel nodded in confirmation that they had, although it might just be a coincidence. Mark then asked if all 5 members of the shield team could do it, and at that moment, a team member shouted that it was his first time succeeding. Mark concluded that it was impossible. It must have been thanks to Wim's buff. Camilla then ordered the long-range units to open fire, and they immediately attacked with their Gevater spear skill, aiming directly at the monster. Unfortunately, the attack had no effect on the monster, leading one member of the group to remark that it was ineffective. Camilla observed and said that she understood. Wim thought to himself that the monster's body had a layer of anti-magic coating. Its eyes were also different from those of other individuals of the same species, and he wondered if this was a subvariant. Camilla then stated that this appeared to be a rare subspecies of the wyvern, a unique variant, and Wim agreed with that assessment. On public, Camilla quickly asked everyone to step back and declared that it was her turn now. Abel announced that he would leave the rest to Camilla, and she nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, she thought about the counterattack skill the shield units had just demonstrated. A secret technique reserved only for those in defensive roles. Even among Nachtliebel's elite, this rarely happens. But all 5 of them managed to do it simultaneously. And those 5 people were the ones who received the Wim buff. This couldn't simply be a coincidence, given how clearly everything unfolded. It was inevitable. She was very curious to know what would happen if she received a buff from Wim. She called Wim and asked if he could buff her. Wim agreed and asked what kind of buff she wanted. Camilla smiled and requested all the attack buffs he had. She further inquired about how many times his maximum attack power could increase with the buff. Wim replied that, purely in terms of strength, considering the risks involved, it could increase by about 3 times. Camilla heard this and said that no, he could do more than that. It's just that he tends to be too cautious. Wim panicked and screamed inwardly, "No, I can't buff the captain," without carefully considering the risks. It's too much of a burden and responsibility for me, but Camilla happily asked him to increase it 10-fold. Wim was shocked and inwardly screamed, "No!" He didn't understand what this woman was talking about. Camilla was slightly surprised and asked if he couldn't do it. Wim reluctantly replied that he could, but increasing the dose 10-fold would increase the risk of dangerous side effects. However, Camilla didn't care about that and ordered him to go ahead. Camilla reassured Wim that he didn't need to worry because, no matter what happened, no one in Nachtliebel would blame him. But Wim was still concerned about the risks. Camilla interrupted him, telling him to go ahead and buff her, and immediately declared her approval. She, Camilla, accepted the blessing from Grantor Wim. Wim was horrified to think that she was a true war-crazed warrior, and inwardly screamed that he wouldn't be responsible for what happened. Then he started buffing Camilla, activating his magic. While analyzing Camilla's body to adjust her buffs, Wim was astonished by her muscle and bone structure, wondering if she was truly human. He identifies the point of contact, establishes the center of gravity, creates small displacements, calculates each fulcrum, force point, and area of influence. Wim summoned Bowen and Enchant, then applied their buffs to Camilla. She sensed the change instantly and smiled excitedly, recognizing the power surging through her body. Camilla said she understood. Now it was time to act, great executioner. Camilla stood face to face with the monster, then she lunged forward to attack. She used her multiplication skill to close the distance, while lightning enveloped her sword. Wim stood watching with the other members, and he exclaimed that it was the legendary sword that had been rumored to be the Great Executioner. One team member said he didn't recall Camilla's multiplication ability ever being able to make the sword that big, and another agreed that he had never seen it this powerful either. Camilla prepared to attack the wyvern, chuckling softly as she called it Little Bird, and telling it to get ready. She admitted that she didn't even know what level of power she currently possessed. As the wyvern lunged forward using its Titan's strike attack, Camilla swung her sword straight at it and took it down with a single blow. All the team members watched in stunned silence, speechless. Then Camilla calmly walked back to where everyone was, and Wim anxiously asked her if she was all right, and if she felt anything unusual. That moved Camilla, and she took Wim's hand and said that his buff was amazing and that her body was perfectly fine. Wim breathed a sigh of relief and said he was glad to hear that, as there was still about a 5% chance of physical aberration or discomfort occurring. Camilla asked in surprise, "Is that all?" Wim further explained that in some cases it could even lead to muscle tears. Camilla was even more shocked, asking if it was really a muscle tear, and that was all? Wim replied that it was very painful. Camilla then asked if there were any other risks besides that, and Wim replied that the pain was enough to cause him to lose control of his body. Hearing this, Camilla burst out laughing, leaving Wim confused about what was happening. Meanwhile, Camilla thought to herself, Wim Strauss, what an interesting person. He possesses extensive knowledge of labyrinths, skills far beyond his age from the information he holds, and his enemy hunting abilities to the capabilities of a grantor, all of which are top-notch. She thought to herself that she didn't care about his past or why he'd been kicked out of the team before. She only knew one thing. She wanted this boy to be a part of Nacht Libelle. Camilla kept laughing non-stop, which worried Wim, so he asked her if something was wrong. He began to wonder if it was a side effect of the buff he had just used, but then immediately dismissed the thought. Impossible, especially since this was Nacht Libelle. At the Nacht Libelle team headquarters, Wim and the other members were cheering and celebrating, throwing a big party. A man stood before the table and announced that during this dive they had discovered a gold vein, and thanks to Mark, a large part of the map had been completed. This was a resounding success, and he urged everyone to eat and drink to their heart's content to celebrate the achievement. At that moment, a girl approached Wim and unexpectedly grabbed his hand, startling him. That was Mage Monica, and she happily said that his performance was so amazing that she almost fainted from excitement. She added that the buff he used on Haida Marie's ice spear was truly difficult to perform without deep knowledge of magic. Wim became flustered, replying that it was true. Monica smiled and complimented him on being a diligent person. But Wim quickly declined, saying that it was actually just because he had once wanted to become a wizard and had studied magic beforehand. Then Wim began to elaborate on other aspects related to the spell. This surprised Monica, who exclaimed that it sounded incredibly complicated. Wim gave a wry smile, embarrassed by her reaction. Deep down, he wondered what to do next. How could one possibly have a natural conversation with someone they'd just met? Just then, someone called his name, attracting Wim's attention. It was Simon, the scout captain, and Bettina, a member of the team. Simon approached and apologized for interrupting him during the celebration, but said he was very interested in his scouting skills. Wim was astonished, thinking to himself that it was Simon, the famous captain of the scouting team. He quickly said that he had read all the books and articles Simon had published. Simon was surprised and said, "Really? I feel very honored to hear that." Simon was about to continue talking about how Wim had discovered the traps in the maze, but was interrupted by someone else. Someone shouted that they shouldn't be talking about work during a celebration like this. Mark appeared with Abel and declared that the only thing they should do right now was drink, while Abel stood behind him, smiling happily. Wim called out Mark's name, and Simon remarked that Mark always drank too much, which made Mark laugh. He handed Simon a bottle of wine and told him not to say such things anymore. They should just drink and have fun together. Then Mark sat down next to Wim and said that, anyway, his buff was really impressive. He said that the fact it could trigger a reflection made him wonder, was that the original goal? Wim hastily denied it, shouting that it wasn't true, that all he did was assist. The achievement was thanks to everyone's skills, specifically all 5 members of the team. Mark laughed heartily and complimented him, saying, "Keep up the humble and you might even get a promotion soon." This left Wim bewildered, not understanding what was happening. Abel also chimed in, saying that Wim's buff was truly amazing. He felt ashamed for his somewhat rude attitude towards him this morning. But Wim told Abel not to worry. He knew he looked suspicious at the time. He was just doing his job, so he couldn't be blamed. However, Wim was still uneasy, worried that he might be ruining the atmosphere. He chuckled softly out of embarrassment, but then realized everyone around him was silent and he immediately felt ashamed. Wim started to walk away, asking for permission and joking that he was going to kill himself. Abel immediately yelled at him to stop, saying it was all right. Abel smiled, placed his hand on Wim's shoulder, and revealed that Haida Marie had once told him that Wim often got lost in his own world. Mark chimed in, saying that Wim didn't need to worry at all. He then asked if Wim would be interested in joining Nacht Lebel anyway. Wim replied cautiously that if he was suitable for the position, then... In his heart, he thought that everyone here was so kind to him. He knew they might just be simple, polite compliments, but they all genuinely appreciated him. This place is really different from Dragon's Wings. Here, everyone has a much calmer and more mature demeanor. This is a nice place to stay. It would be great if he could actually stay there. Unexpectedly, Haida Marie appeared, taking a bite of meat as she walked in, and she said in a relaxed voice that everyone had done a great job. Wim looked at her, his voice trembling as he repeated her words. Mark called her little girl and told her to sit down, which she agreed to. Wim remarked that her appetite was as good as ever. At that moment, someone shouted that they had run out of meat, to which Wim could only comment that it was nothing unusual. Haida Marie said that Wim was becoming quite popular anyway, but he asked her not to say that anymore. She teased him, asking if he was worried about getting too much attention, and Wim admitted a little. Everyone else was doing great, while he was simply the supporting actor. Haida Marie asked if he was still talking about those things, then asked if he noticed the passionate look Camilla gave him. She'd definitely go crazy for him. But Wim told her not to talk about those things anymore. He was about to say something about Camilla when Haida Marie interrupted him, reminding him that she was probably in the office handling the paperwork related to today's dive. Wim said that was great, then thanked her and left. Meanwhile, Camilla was in her office, feeling pressured and wondering if she could finish all her work before the end of the day. She thought today's dive was a huge success and Wim's performance was incredibly impressive. But what kept her thinking was the buff he used. That buff blended perfectly with her body, making it feel as if she had wings growing on her back, so gentle and natural that one could mistake it for her inherent strength, rather than something she was receiving assistance with. It made everyone feel like they were in their best form, and because of that, she achieved damage far beyond what she thought she could achieve. Camilla wondered if they could use this kind of buff for training. But then she also considered the possibility that if people became too accustomed to the feeling of being buffed, they wouldn't be able to reach greater heights. Camilla continued to think that she had probably reached the limits of her skills, but with his support, she might be able to surpass that threshold. Just then, there was a knock on the door and someone called her name. She recognized it was Wim and told him to come in. When Wim walked into the office, he wondered why she was still wearing her armor. Camilla asked him what was wrong. Wim handed her a piece of paper and said that this was part of his report. He wants to submit it to the Adventurers Guild. He explained that he had discovered a gold vein during this dive, and since he was still an outsider, he felt it necessary to submit a separate report from his side. Camilla thanked him. As Camilla read the report, she was surprised by the amount of information it contained, wondering how it could be so detailed. With this much data, she thought that simply combining it with her own report would be more than enough. Camilla felt relieved. Now she could finish her work for the day. And then Camilla said that, thinking back, he had mentioned before that he used to do things like that at Dragon's Wings. Wim confirmed this and explained that he had been in charge of everything outside of combat, from accounting to other odd jobs, because apart from support roles, he didn't have many other skills. Camilla was surprised to hear him say that he would take care of everything, and then she fell silent. She thought to herself, "So that's it, now I understand." She wondered if this was some kind of secret negotiation. He personally submitted his report, all because he knew this was his best chance to prove his worth and find his way into Nacht Lebel. Initially, Camilla thought Wim was just a person with low self-esteem, but in the end, it all seemed to have been planned. And if that were true, she accepted the challenge and chuckled inwardly. Wim called her name, somewhat bewildered by the change in her eyes. Camilla then asked him, "How about 500 liters of milk?" and looked at him with a determined expression. Wim, shocked, asked what she was talking about, and Camilla replied that the newly discovered gold veins were under the control of the entire Nachtliebel team, so he wouldn't get any share of the gold. However, if he decides to join their team, she will happily add another 2,000 on top of the initial 500. Wim was confused, not understanding what she was saying, but Camilla asked if that wasn't enough for him. She secretly thought that his expression suggested he wasn't interested in negotiating, but in reality, he was so audacious that he was hiding his true capabilities, just waiting for the right moment to offer the highest price. Camilla continued to think the boy was being unreasonable, but she couldn't let Wim be snatched away by another team. Therefore, she announced that she would increase his reward today to 700, and if he agreed to join, he would receive an initial bonus of 3,000 exclusively for him. Camilla added that after that, his fixed monthly salary would be the same as that of the veteran members, 600 milk per month, and of course there would be additional bonuses depending on future performance. Wim was still confused while Camilla asked how he was doing and what he was feeling. He hesitated, asking if it was a joke, while Camilla countered, asking if that wasn't enough. She wanted to know how much he used to be paid at Dragon's Wings and said she would pay him double that amount. Wim held up 2 fingers in front of Camilla, prompting her to ask if that was 200 stars and if her offer wasn't enough. But Wim stammered, denying it. Camilla wondered what he meant, then figured that if it was 2,000, he was really serious about joining. However, Wim's face showed clear sadness, and then he revealed to Camilla that the real number was 20. Camilla was stunned, and Wim explained that the monthly salary he used to receive was only 20 units of milk. Camilla immediately jumped to her feet, asking in astonishment, "Only 20?" Then she thought to herself that even a new employee at a grocery store earns more. And yet this was the salary of an adventurer who regularly gambles with their life. It was a joke. But when she looked at Wim's face, she realized that his expression didn't seem like he was joking at all. Wim told Camilla that she didn't need to force herself to give him a reward. Of course, if she did, he would be very happy. But before he could finish his sentence, Wim turned and ran, and Camilla called out loudly, telling him to stop. After Wim left, Camilla was still in shock, wondering if he really only got paid 20 units of milk a month. She couldn't believe it. With his abilities, Wim should have been the cornerstone behind Dragon's Wings' success. She couldn't understand why he was being treated that way, and why someone who played such an important role in the team was being fired. Camilla found everything absurd and wondered what kind of team Dragon's Wings actually was. Meanwhile, on the 35th floor of the labyrinth, the Dragon's Wings crew were fleeing in panic as they were pursued by a horde of goblins. Kronos ran, gasping for breath, thinking to himself that he had once believed that their adventurous life would be easier once Wim left. Since their near-fatal battle with the boss, their wounds had healed, and they had even added a new member to their fighting lineup. All of that should have made Dragon's Wings a perfect team. As long as they could recover from their injuries, progressing to the deepest levels shouldn't be a problem. They were a team about to be promoted to a higher rank. Everything should have gone smoothly. Kronos clutched her injured arm and shouted for Nikor to quickly treat her wound. Nikor replied that she understood, but Kronos yelled that she was too slow. His mind was filled with doubt, unable to understand why things had turned out this way, wondering if something had gone wrong. He turned to ask Malus if the barrier was ready while she chanted the opening phrase, "Two lines never intersect." Kronos realized the incantation wasn't finished yet, and was astonished at how long it was taking. Malus then used her fire shield skill to prevent the monster from attacking. Kronos immediately shouted orders for the entire team to retreat and follow him. Later, as the entire Dragon's Wings crew continued their journey, Kronos asked Nikor if the recovery was complete. She treated his wounds and apologized for saying she wasn't feeling well. Kronos also apologized, saying that he had lost his temper a little earlier. After the treatment was complete, Nikor asked how he was feeling, and he replied that he was much better and thanked her. Kronos smiled and said that if Nikor was all right, they could absolutely start over, which made her feel happy. Then he clapped his hands and declared that even though the team wasn't in their best form at the moment, they could still fight. Kronos added that the goblin horde would quickly catch up, so they needed to find an escape route and first determine their current location. He asked if there were any easily recognizable landmarks nearby. Melis called after Kronos and asked specifically what kind of place he was looking for. Kronos apologized, saying he didn't know either and asked if anyone had any ideas. Sophia called out Kronos' name, giving him hope that she had some clue. But she shook her head and said there was nothing there, instead announcing that they were currently at a dead end. Kronos panicked, realizing they were trapped in the worst possible situation. A dead end in the labyrinth, with the enemy close behind. At the Dragon's Wings cruise house, Melis asked Nikor if she could eat anything, but Nikor replied that it would be difficult. Melis said there was some water there. Shortly afterward, Nikor started coughing, causing Melis to anxiously ask if she was all right. Nikor replied that she was fine and thanked Melis. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Kronos entered the room, carrying a plate, and said that Sophia had peeled some apples for her. Kronos fed Nikor an apple and told her they should rest a little now. He added that he was truly surprised they encountered difficulties right on the 35th floor. Perhaps the group hadn't fully recovered from their previous battle with the floor boss. He admitted that it was all due to his own misjudgment, and if Nicker hated him for it, he wouldn't blame her. But Nicker gently replied that it wasn't his fault. Melis agreed and insisted that he shouldn't blame himself. Kronos was deeply moved by those words, and he hugged both Melis and Nikor tightly. He then said that the team simply wasn't in their best form, so they just needed to try harder and give it another try. Melis and Nikor both nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Sophia was sitting alone, silently reflecting on the disastrous outcome of her recent dive. Their tactics revolved solely around basic swordsmanship and a few simple spells. Their coordination was very poor, and their understanding of the labyrinth map was incomplete. It's hard to believe they ever made it past floor 30. She recalled that during the battle, she used a flashbang and shouted to the group that this was their chance to retreat. At that moment, Kronos told her she was a true savior. Sophia thought to herself that despite their desperate situation, they were lucky to have survived. In that circumstance, it wouldn't have been surprising if the entire team had been wiped out. She knew perfectly well that they were still recovering, but she couldn't possibly recognize this as the B-rank team that had once defeated the floor boss. Not only that, but now there's another problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the stack of documents in front of her, she recalled Kronos saying that the person who had done this job before her was completely useless. So they had handed over all the menial tasks to that person. Then he asked her if she could take on the job. He also added that if it becomes too much, they can share the workload. But for now, he's relying on her. Sophia pondered the remark. He had called the previous person useless. She continued sifting through the pile of papers. Reports, delivery schedules, team home repair plans, invoices, taxes, and more. In addition, there are documents detailing the layout of each level in the labyrinth, along with the detailed characteristics of the monsters that appear there. The level of detail in the documents is so extensive that it's almost a complete, in-depth essay. Sophia realized that the workload was truly overwhelming, and she began to wonder if her predecessor had done all of this alone. He called that person useless, but on the contrary, Sophia began to wonder, what exactly had the leader of this team, Kronos, actually accomplished? In a flashback, Kronos is sparring with Wim. When he lands a blow that causes Wim to scream in pain, Kronos said that he couldn't even handle the role of sparring partner, then turned to Nikor and told her to treat him. Nikor replied that she understood and had begun to heal Wim, but she coldly made it clear that she wasn't doing this for him. Then she reproached him, asking if he couldn't be a little more useful for Kronos' benefit. Wim sadly apologized to Nikor, while Kronos yelled that if he was healed, he should get up immediately. Wim replied and struggled to his feet. Kronos immediately yelled at him, telling him to remember one thing. He was completely replaceable by anyone else. No place in the world was generous enough to hire someone like him. So he should start being useful for once, or he'll get fired. Wim was shocked to hear that and repeated in a panic that he would be fired. Kronos angrily retorted, "Isn't that obvious?" then yelled that he had been kicked out and told him to get out of there immediately. At that moment, Wim suddenly woke up from his dream, his whole body trembling with fear. On the roof of a nearby building, Hidamari quietly watched him and said that Wim was having nightmares related to Dragon's Wings again. She called him poor little Wim in a voice full of pity. She said that Wim is currently staying at Nachtlebel's guest house as a temporary member, and ever since he moved here, keeping an eye on him has become much easier. Previously, due to the vast distance between their residences, surveillance was severely limited, and there were even times when she had to sneak into the Dragon's Wing space. But now, such dangerous actions are no longer necessary. The various communication seals, eavesdropping stones, and even the magic she created herself to monitor Wim All were legitimate games as long as the purpose was to ensure his safety. Hidamari giggled as she wrote in her diary. As she wrote, she recounted, Wim's Observation Diary, Volume 105, Morning. Wim starts his day by going for a run to relax his body. At the Nachtli canteen, breakfast consisted of boiled and grilled sausages, moderately salty bacon, and steamed potatoes with a soft, yellow interior. Wim liked such simple meals. In the afternoon, he spent time researching magic and the ecosystem of monsters. Back in Dragon's Wings, he was always busy with all sorts of chores, but now at Nachtli, he has free time to do what he truly wants. In Wim's room, Hidamari stood silently before him as he slept, thinking to herself how adorable he looked in his deep slumber. She noted in her diary that his weight was 129.26 grams, 0.21 grams heavier than yesterday. Then she continued thinking about their conversations. In one of them, she had said, "Oh, what a coincidence, I didn't expect to see you here," and Wim had replied, "Good morning." Then she walked down the hallway, thinking to herself that she still couldn't believe Wim lived so close to her. She wondered how many years had passed since they had last been this close. The next morning, while I was in my room, a bell rang continuously. Hidamari's listening stone signals that Wim is doing something that is not part of his usual schedule. She immediately opened the map to check. Hidamari wondered what Wim was doing in the courtyard. Who had dragged him out there? Was it Abel? She ordered the eavesdropping stone to activate, and when the stone began to vibrate, she heard a voice say, "Sorry for calling you so early in the morning." Hidamari was immediately shocked to realize it was a woman's voice. In the courtyard, Wim was with Camilla, and she announced that they should begin. Wim agreed. Observing from the rooftop, Hidamari breathed a sigh of relief and muttered that it was just Camilla after all, and she had worried too much. Meanwhile, Wim summoned Enchant and began buffing Camilla. Hidamari continued to observe and commented that Wim and Camilla currently seem to be using Wim's buff during a training session. She explained that the first step is, once the body has been given a weak buff, move as fast as possible so that the body gradually adapts to the new speed. Step 2, when the buff disappears, try to recreate that movement using your own strength. Hidamari continued to observe and realized that this was Camilla's plan to gradually overcome her own limitations. As Camilla swung her sword, a strong gust of wind erupted from her movement. After a moment, Wim stood motionless, stunned. Meanwhile, Hidamari thought to herself, "What a monster!" Camilla had adapted to the speed of the weak buff in just an hour. Camilla excitedly said, "That's great, very good," and smiled with delight. She noted that her hand was still slightly misaligned and wondered how she could fix that. Wim thought for a moment, and then told her that if he adjusted the friction in her joints, she might achieve more optimal movement. He added that it was more like a performance reduction than a buff, but Camilla asked if he could do it and immediately agreed. Then Camilla tried again, and Wim asked her how she felt. Camilla called him Little Wim and hugged him tightly between her breasts, causing Hidamari to scream in shock. Camilla exclaimed with delight, "That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful." While Hidamari continued to watch, she angrily shouted, "Why would Camilla do that to my Wim?" Hidamari reassured herself, "No, wait, I need to stay calm." Camilla smiled, and Hidamari told herself it was just Camilla. She was only hugging Wim out of excitement. Yes, simply that, there was nothing between them. Wim grinned brightly while Camilla continued to hug him, and Hidamari looked back and began to wonder if there really was nothing between them. A little later, Camilla said that from now on they should also invite Abel to join the morning training sessions, and informed Wim that he would, of course, be compensated for this. Wim asked if that was really okay. Hidamari continued taking notes. And then, as evening came, Mark invited Wim out for drinks. Meanwhile, Hidamari, leaning against a wall, thought that what seemed like a natural invitation was actually just a ploy by Camilla to keep Wim around until he officially joined the team. She would continue to arrange for the team members to build relationships with him, making it increasingly difficult for him to leave. In the evening, Hidamari sat in her room and told herself that Wim would be out drinking with the others. She thought she wouldn't be following Wim around all day and night. She wasn't a stalker. Even she knew she had to respect Wim's personal privacy. Meanwhile, a group of male adventurers were gathered at a bar in the bustling city at night. One man, the deputy captain of Nachtli, raised his glass and declared this the official welcome party for Wim to join the crew, then shouted loudly while raising his bottle high. The adventurers continued to celebrate. Meanwhile, Hidamari was on the roof of a nearby building, looking down at them. She was furious at what she saw and yelled that she knew it all along. It was full of cowgirls. They must have been to that kind of place. When Hidamari saw Wim glancing at the girls in the bar, she angrily yelled at him to stop looking, then cursed the damn perverts, accusing him of being a terrible person. But the restaurant was so crowded that she couldn't hear everything that was being said clearly. Inside the cafe, Hans chatted with Wim and mentioned that he'd heard he came from the same hometown as Hidamari, and asked if that was true. Wim nodded in confirmation, saying that they were both from Rierefeld. Hans remarked that it was quite far and asked why he had come here alone. Wim replied that it was probably just a feeling of longing, some kind of desire. Hans agreed, saying that he had also read heroic stories when he was a child, so he finally got to visit this land. Mark interjected and revealed that he heard from Monica that Wim had initially wanted to become a wizard. Wim confirmed that this was true. Mark added that if it were him, he would also prefer the wizards and fairy tales to the heroes with their epic stories. Wim agreed, saying he understood the feeling. He also mentioned that he particularly liked a story where the main character transforms into a princess later on, then awkwardly asked if he could remember its name. Hans asked if it was Cinderella, and Wim replied that it was. He suddenly realized he was engaged in a conversation, a genuine, natural, and relaxed conversation. Wim and the others continued their lively conversation while Hidamari watched them laughing and chatting from a distance. She smiled slightly and silently wished Wim good luck. At the same time, she whispered to him not to drink too much, lest he oversleep the next morning. After a while, Wim left the bar and walked alone. Mark saw him and called out, saying, "This way, the singles club goes." Another man asked Mark if he already had a family, but Mark just smiled and said it was fine. The other man continued, saying that he didn't think it was a good idea to invite Wim anyway. Mark wondered why. The other man explained that he knew that little girl, referring to Hidamari. Mark was slightly confused and turned to ask Wim if he had a girlfriend. Wim, astonished, asked if he was referring to Hidamari, then quickly denied it, asserting that they were just friends. Mark nodded, saying he understood. But the other man yelled no, then pointed out that the way she was behaving towards Wim was definitely not that of a friend. Wim explained that Hidamari was kind to him because she felt a sense of responsibility towards him, or at least that's what he thought. Both the other man and Mark were surprised, and they questioned him about what he meant by responsibility. Suddenly, Hidamari appeared and happily remarked on what a coincidence. The man unexpectedly asked if she wasn't the little girl, while Mark asked her why she was there. Hidamari replied that she guessed it was just a girls' night out. Then she turned and asked where the other two were taking Wim, which embarrassed both Mark and the other man. Wim called out Hidamari's name and she smiled, saying it was perfect timing, and asked him to take her home. Wim agreed, and Hidamari thought to himself that at least with Wim joining Nachtlibelle, things were progressing in the right direction. As they walked together, Wim asked her to listen to him for a moment. He said that a lot had happened that day. Hidamari smiled and said that she knew. Wim shared that everyone at Nachtlibelle was very kind and open to him. They truly accepted him. This was completely different from the feeling he had at Dragon's Wings. This is the first time he's felt he can truly fit in with the people around him. That's the feeling he's having right now. Wim suddenly became worried and said, "What if you're misunderstanding everyone's kindness?" But Hidamari insisted that he wasn't misunderstanding anything at all. Wim wondered how she could be so sure, saying that she hadn't witnessed everything. But Hidamari insisted that she had said it countless times already. When it came to Wim, she knew everything. She believed this was one of the most positive things that had ever happened to him. A few days later, Dominic, a member of the Adventurers Guild's investigation team, came to see Camilla. Camilla asked him what he was doing there. Dominic replied that his team had been conducting a secret investigation and wanted her cooperation. Camilla was confused when she heard that and asked him what he was talking about. Dominic explained that the main target of the investigation was former Dragon's Wings member Wim Strauss. Camilla laughed at Dominic's words, finding them utterly ridiculous. Dominic responded that it was understandable that she found it hard to believe. Camilla added that what he was implying was indeed very difficult for anyone to accept. She added that the possibility of Wim, that kid, defeating the boss of floor 97 on his own was completely impossible. Dominic replied that while they both found it hard to believe, the evidence was clear. The boss's body only bore wounds inflicted by machetes. It was still possible that the group's leader, Kronos, had used Sir Wim's own machete to inflict those wounds on the monster. If they could prove it, then it would all be over. But because Sir Wim submitted a complete report with no loopholes, they couldn't open a public inquiry into the matter. Camilla told Dominic that what he was referring to was the secrets within the labyrinth. And as a member of the investigation team, he had a responsibility to uncover them. Dominic replied that they had temporarily postponed Dragon's Wing's promotion to the A tier. But that still couldn't prevent the three men who hadn't inflicted any injury on the boss from being hailed as heroes of Full Brown City. However, he himself had never heard of a single person being able to defeat the floor boss. In fact, he was the only one who had put forward this theory. Dominic added that after reading all the reports submitted by Sir Wim, he could confirm that they were flawless. However, there was still one thing that bothered him. Camilla asked what it was, and Dominic replied that in all those reports, there wasn't a single line mentioning Wim's individual achievements. It was as if he deliberately kept himself out of the spotlight. Camilla commented that it sounded very much like his personality, and Dominic confirmed that it was exactly right. Camilla later admitted that although it was hard to believe since Dominic had said so much, she thought she would cooperate, especially since her team also wants to better understand Wim's combat abilities. They will need to test his fighting skills. Later, Wim was traveling with some members of Nacht Libelle and opened a public communication channel. On that channel, he announced that this was Wim, apologizing for bringing this up at this particular moment, but there was a potential trap to the left, about 50 units away. Camilla replied that she understood and informed them that they would change their itinerary. Wim thought to himself that he hoped the information had been clearly conveyed, then began to recount that several months had passed since he joined Nacht Libelle. His role in the team was fairly basic. He was positioned in the center, and depending on the situation, he would either provide buffs or conduct scouting. What surprised him was that lately the team had stopped hiding their teleportation abilities from him. This meant that Nacht Libelle had begun to trust him, and they were recognizing his true potential. Wim was truly grateful that they gave him the opportunity to properly utilize his skills. On the news channel, Camilla called out Wim's name, and he asked what was wrong. Camilla asked if he could show her his fighting skills. This left Wim a little confused, saying that he had already been in quite a few battles. But Camilla made it clear that she wanted to see him fight alone. She asked if a grantor could buff himself to fight. Wim replied that he was still very weak. Camilla said that next time they plan on a large-scale labyrinth expedition, she wants to assess Wim's combat skills in case of an emergency. She added that if she could confirm that Wim was capable of fighting alone, the whole team would be less worried. She asked if he agreed with that, and Wim replied that he understood. Just then, Simon announced that they had spotted a large golem about 140 units away, traveling alone. Hans said it was a golem, while Camilla turned to Wim and said that fighting this kind of monster alone wouldn't be easy. So, after he fought for a while, she would have a place to hide. Haida Marie and the others would immediately provide support. She asked for his opinion, and Wim replied that he would do his best. Camilla praised him, saying it was a good answer. Then, Wim stood before the golem and realized just how huge it was, which filled him with fear. Haida Marie encouraged him from behind, telling him to keep going, that he could do it. But Wim said that a weakling like him could die from this. Haida Marie immediately replied that no, he wouldn't die. Wim drew his machete and prepared to confront the golem. Meanwhile, Hans told Camilla that he knew Wim was a special person, but letting a grantor face a golem was truly cruel. Hans added that this type of opponent should be handled by teams ranked B or higher. However, Camilla responded that she was fully aware of that. She said that Wim's grant ability is truly exceptional. His buffs are so detailed that they can be applied individually to every muscle and joint in the human body. Although these are all weak buffs, when combined, they create a power level far exceeding that of typical grantors. Hans asked if she believed Wim could defeat the golem, and Camilla replied that it was possible. Hans thought to himself that Camilla seemed to genuinely care about Wim. Meanwhile, Wim began to recount that those who became adventurers all underwent a special ritual to receive their profession, and when that happens, their bodies will change dramatically. First, their physical strength will increase tenfold compared to the average person. However, grantors are an exception, as their physical strength is only slightly greater than that of an average person. Their techniques are also very difficult to learn and master. And even when they buff themselves, they rarely reach the same level of power as other professions. That's why grantors are so rare. Their only advantage is that they can start fighting almost immediately after receiving the job, as the power change is minimal and easily adaptable. The golem lunged to attack Wim, but he immediately used his instant enhancement ×2. Zawamar's skill to dodge the attack. He went on to explain that the biggest advantage of buffing himself was that he didn't need approval from others to pave the way for the grantor's orders. Unlike simply buffing others, he can fine-tune buffs in real time. Buffs that could previously only be applied once to each body part can now be used twice. However, since his mana wasn't enough to sustain the buff for long, he was forced to end this battle quickly and decisively. Wim continued fighting the golem, thinking that with his current abilities, even he could fight it. However, because the buffs were too powerful for his weak body, the recoil would be very painful. But suddenly Wim realized there was no reaction at all. This astonished him greatly. He wondered why this was the case. Had his skills improved? Perhaps he could now fight longer than before, but he immediately reminded himself not to be overconfident, to stay calm. He wondered if he should continue and decided he should. He used instant boost ×3, droll, and charged at the golem. When Wim discovered the golem's core, he focused his gaze on it with unwavering determination. Then he delivered a precise blow that struck the core, causing the golem to collapse. From a distance, the members of Aniclimax were watching the entire match. Mark turned to ask Hans if he saw what had just happened. Hans replied that he had seen it, but only caught a glimpse of it in a split second. One female member remarked that the game was over, while a male member exclaimed in astonishment that he had only turned away for a moment. Hans gave a wry smile and remarked that, if only considering speed, Wim was indeed one of the fastest in all of Full Brown. On the way back to Aniclimax, Wim bowed his head in apology, saying that his judgment in the recent battle had been a little slow and asking if he had taken too long. But the members of the team immediately shouted in denial. One person asked if he was being sarcastic, while another excitedly exclaimed that the performance was amazing and unbelievable. Meanwhile, Camilla called Hidamari over and asked who Wim really was. Hidamari calmly replied that he was just Wim, a grantor. She also emphasized that another important thing to remember was that they came from the same country. Camilla responded that she knew, but that wasn't what she wanted to say. Hidamari smiled proudly and said that he was very strong. Wim ran to Hidamari, excitedly telling her that she had to hear his story. He was in a very good mood today, so he decided to be a little more daring than usual. He smiled broadly, adding that his body felt numb with excitement at that moment. Camilla looked at him and thought to herself, he looked like an adventurer who had just slain his first monster. She wondered if this was really the same person who had just fought on the front lines in the labyrinth. Moreover, if he really was the one who defeated a boss, his current behavior becomes even more contradictory. Someone like him should have achieved something remarkable. However, his self-esteem is at rock bottom, and his fighting abilities have never been officially recognized before. Judging by his current behavior, Camilla suspected that he wasn't intentionally hiding his abilities. She couldn't understand. Why was everything about him so contradictory and unpredictable? Hidamari turned to Wim and said, "Okay, calm down now, you're getting too excited." Wim asked, bewildered, if he had said something strange. Hidamari replied that he was practically bursting with excitement. Wim looked around and then shouted in embarrassment that it was so embarrassing. But Hidamari encouraged him, saying that he had done very well to be able to defeat a golem entirely by himself. Wim replied that he was happy this would ease everyone's worries about him. But he also admitted that he could only take such a risk knowing that everyone was always there for him. Wim rubbed his shoulder and complained that his body ached after taking such a risk. But upon closer inspection, he was surprised to find that he felt no pain at all. He thought to himself that even though he had used a level 3 buff and should have exhausted all his mana, leaving his body completely worn out, yet he still had some energy left. Wim wondered if it was because he himself had become stronger. Just then, Mark approached and urged the SHIELD team to toss him up in the air to celebrate. The SHIELD team immediately responded, shouting "Hip hip hooray," as they lifted him into the air. Hidamari smiled gently and said that the world was finally beginning to realize how wonderful Wim was. A few days later at Aniclimax, Monica was standing by the window, gazing intently outside. Hans asked her what she was looking at. Monica pointed outside and told him to look. She was watching Camilla, Wim, and Abel practice, and remarked that they practiced every morning truly diligently. Hans turned to her and said that if she admired them so much, why didn't she join them? Monica replied that she thought her participation would only cause them trouble. Hans nodded in agreement and sarcastically remarked that she never knew when to be quiet, which angered Monica. Outside, Camilla told Abel and Wim that they should stop there for today's practice. But Abel insisted that he still had enough energy and could continue. Camilla reminded him that tomorrow was the large-scale expedition down to floor 98. Normally, he should be resting today. Abel admitted that he knew that, but still wanted to push himself a little harder. Just then, Wim interrupted them and asked if they could give him some feedback on the buff he was fine-tuning. He said that this would probably be the last time he would edit it. Camilla and Abel immediately exclaimed excitedly in unison that they thought it was wonderful. Abel happily shared that he was delighted to train with Wim every morning. Camilla said that given her current physique, he couldn't imagine how much her body had improved since they started, and she was truly shocked by how much they could learn each day. Wim shouted that no, he hadn't done anything. In fact, he was the one who had learned a lot from both of them. Camilla said she was really grateful to Wim. Even though he was only a temporary member, he was always willing to go the extra mile to support everyone. She couldn't help but be excited at the thought of soon having the opportunity to seriously test herself. She became increasingly excited, saying she couldn't even imagine what would happen if she gave it her all right now. Wim thought to himself that these two were really good at complimenting him, always lifting his spirits. Camilla then advised Wim and Abel that, in preparation for tomorrow, they should go to bed early. They both agreed. But unexpectedly, Camilla changed her mind and said that, actually... Then she asked how the three of them would go out to eat something together. This surprised Wim. Abel excitedly said it was a great idea while Wim was speechless. Camilla turned to Wim, apologized, and asked if he had made any plans. Wim confirmed and revealed that he intends to attend the scout team's group study session. Camilla asked if that was the case, and she commented that it was an important event, very helpful for tomorrow's trip, so he shouldn't let them hold him back. Wim apologized for it, but Camilla reassured him that he didn't need to worry about them at all. Then she laughed and said it looked like they had just been rejected. Abel turned to Camilla and asked if they could continue with their morning training session. And Camilla agreed, but only for a short time. Abel thanked her profusely with delight. Later, Camilla was walking towards her office, telling herself that perhaps she had pushed herself a little too hard today. She thought she should probably take a slightly stronger recovery medication. As Camilla walked down the hallway, she overheard the voices of several members of Nacht Libelle talking in a nearby room. Inside, Bettina explained that this was why Wim's detection abilities were so accurate, though not as wide as Simon's. Wim explained that it was because he infused the spell with a little magic. Bettina went on to comment that the trap Wim had discovered the day before was truly impressive. Camilla, eavesdropping from outside, thought to herself that Wim had had a huge influence on the team since joining. But she wasn't surprised. Anyone who interacted with him would have felt the same way. She wondered how much training Wim had put in to reach his current level of skill. He ignited a fire in people's hearts, inspiring them to constantly strive for self-improvement. But when Camilla heard someone say, "That kid Wim gives me the creeps," she was immediately startled. Another man commented that the members who had previously explored with him all praised him and questioned whether there was something fishy behind it. Mark heard and walked over to the man who had spoken. The man immediately apologized, saying he had only been gossiping unintentionally. And Mark replied that he understood that feeling. It was indeed difficult to fully comprehend. Mark added that Wim was a grantor, and assessing how much effort he had put in was not easy, even with Hidamari's recommendation. Accepting someone like that into Nacht Libelle is no easy task, especially considering the effort others have put in to join the team. Camilla stood in the hallway, listening quietly. She thought it wasn't surprising that Wim and some of the other members, who had never explored together before, could create such a conflicting effect. In any case, Nacht Libelle is a team where students from various magic academies, along with nobles from prestigious families, all fiercely compete to be selected after a rigorous competition. Camilla continued to think that generally someone who had been kicked out of a team wouldn't easily be able to join another one without undergoing a rigorous evaluation. But that will probably change after tomorrow's expedition. Once everyone witnesses Wim's true skills firsthand, things will be different. At that moment, someone contacted Camilla via the communication channel, informing her that a representative from the Adventurers Guild had come to see her. Camilla replied that she understood and asked her to bring the person into the office afterward. In Camilla's office, Dominic was reading a report and mentioned that Wim had single-handedly defeated a mud golem. He asked her how she felt. Camilla replied that it was a very impressive achievement. Dominic then asked, in her opinion, is it possible for Wim to defeat the floor boss on his own? Camilla thought carefully about it, but ultimately replied that no, she didn't think so. However, she asserted that Wim's speed was exceptional. Even within the entire Full Brown, it would be difficult to find a grantor quite like him. However, if we consider only combat ability, Camilla believes that Wim is perfectly capable of reaching the same level as the core members of Aniclimax. Dominic asked in surprise if that was really true, but Camilla interrupted him, saying that if Wim was indeed hiding something, the situation could change completely. Dominic then asked about the possibility that Wim was hiding something, and Camilla simply replied that it was precisely because Wim was so special that she couldn't rule out that possibility. Dominic mentioned that a large-scale expedition to the 98th floor would begin tomorrow. If Camilla discovers that Wim is hiding anything, he hopes she will inform the society. Camilla agreed, but she added one condition: only if they all returned alive. Meanwhile, Hidamari was at the bar, enjoying a meal and chatting with Greta. She revealed that Wim had recently finally stopped having nightmares, and his sleeping face looked incredibly cute. Hidamari added that he even talked in his sleep. Greta heard this and asked her if it was true, but her face showed a hint of sadness. Hidamari noticed and asked Greta what was going on, calling her the cow as usual, and remarked that Greta didn't seem as happy as usual today. A man sitting next to Hidamari spoke up, telling her she didn't need to force herself like that, and addressed her as Sage-sama. He explained that last week one of the adventurer groups who regularly frequented the tavern had ventured into the 98th floor of the labyrinth, and hadn't returned since. Hidamari was saddened to hear this news and thought to himself that, driven by a desire for conquest and achievement, smaller groups often proactively ventured deeper into the labyrinth before larger teams began large-scale investigations. However, it remains unexplored territory. Of course, most who venture in will disappear forever, and if their bodies are ever found, that's still a better outcome than vanishing without a trace. Hidamari said that the life of an adventurer is always a dance with death. Even those who frequently face danger understand this, but they are still willing to step into it because they have prepared themselves mentally beforehand. There is no other choice but to accept this harsh reality. Greta slowly agreed and said that she understood. But Hidamari suddenly told Greta loudly that enough was enough, that she shouldn't be so downcast. She decided to buy Greta a drink and urged her to have one. Greta was stunned by the unexpectedness of it all, saying that this was very rare, and asked if it was really all right. Hidamari confidently declared that it was perfectly fine, and that she should have a drink tonight, the person who would treat her being none other than the next candidate to run Nacht de Belle and the 74th Sage-sama. Greta immediately raised a huge glass of wine and shouted cheers. But Hidamari shrieked in alarm, telling her to stop, calling Greta a demon cow, and she yelled that the glass was too big. Greta calmly replied that a glass is a glass after all. Hidamari tried to compromise, saying that if the price remained the same, it would be fine, but Greta revealed that the price was a milk. Hidamari immediately yelled in anger. Wasn't that 5 times more expensive? She called Greta a devilish cow again, but Greta just laughed and told her not to worry about such trivial matters. One man in the cafe burst out laughing, while another commented that it had been a long time since he'd seen Greta laugh like that. Greta turned and called Hidamari S-chan, which only angered Hidamari further, causing her to yell that her name was Hidamari, and there was no S in it. Then Greta asked if Hidamari planned to join the expedition to level 98 the next day. Hidamari replied that he did. Greta burst into tears, begging Hidamari to return safely. She said that after he returned, they should visit the cafe together with Wim one more time. Hidamari was taken aback by those words. Then she softly replied that it was only natural. She thought to herself that the person they had just laughed and joked with today might not exist in this world tomorrow. That was the daily reality of the world they lived in. Meanwhile, on the 98th floor of the labyrinth, a man yelled in panic. "What is this?" He said they had gone too deep and needed to retreat immediately. As the group of adventurers fled, a monster was in close pursuit. The desperate man apologized to Ilya and begged his daughter to forgive him. He shouted, challenging the monster to come closer. They would fight and fall like true adventurers. "Come and try," he said as the monster appeared from behind him, startling him. Finally, the day had arrived when Aniclimax would explore the 98th level of the labyrinth. The crowd outside cheered Camilla enthusiastically, while others hurriedly called out to Hans, urging him to look in that direction. Wim looked around and thought to himself, as expected from a large-scale labyrinth investigation organized by Aniclimax, the atmosphere was bustling, much like a festival. He wondered if everyone else was watching too. But then, he suddenly realized that in his mind, he was still referring to the members of Dragon's Wing as everyone. He continued to think that, looking back, he hadn't heard any news from Dragonswing lately. He wondered if their wounds hadn't healed yet. But then he shook his head. It wasn't right. He was in Aniclimax now, even if only temporarily. Then you shouldn't keep dwelling on unnecessary thoughts. In the crowd, a man spoke up, saying that Aniclimax would be deploying 122 people for this labyrinth expedition. Another person asked what miraculous results they would achieve, and he confessed that he himself was very much looking forward to it. Another man suddenly chimed in, asking if everyone had heard anything about the sensational, newly famous interim member of Aniclimax, a grantor mage who had been expelled from the Dragonswing team. The whole group was stunned. Another person added that he had heard that the person was truly very skilled in the adventurer world, and had now become a topic of discussion everywhere. It is said that the frontline teams shouldered the greatest responsibility. They were the first to throw themselves into danger. The labyrinths are always illogical and full of deadly traps, especially for newcomers. Furthermore, the chances of encountering floor bosses or floor masters are very high. But if you overcome all those dangers, the glory of conquering the labyrinth will be a well-deserved reward awaiting you. Camilla shouted, demanding everyone's attention. She announced that from now on they would begin investigating floor 98, a place no one had ever set foot in. This was a mission unlike any they had ever undertaken. It was a real and genuine gamble with their lives. She told everyone to leave their fears behind and use their willpower to prepare themselves for battle. They had to be prepared to give up their lives. But it was with those lives that they would protect their honor, their treasure, and their comrades. Camilla shouted that Aniclimax would return without a single feather lost, without any sorrow on their journey back. They would hold their heads high, raising the flag of victory, returning triumphantly with pride. Finally, she shouted, "Aniclimax of full brown!" And all the members of Aniclimax cheered in unison in excitement. Wim also shouted along with everyone, but Haida Marie remarked that he was clearly not good at these kinds of things. Wim immediately reacted, saying that she shouldn't have said that even though she noticed. But then his eyes lowered sadly. Wim whispered that the first level of the labyrinth lay directly beneath the Adventurers Guild. From there, the team proceeded via the shortest and safest passage that Aniclimax had discovered on the 98th floor. Standing on this floor, Wim looked up and realized he couldn't even see the ceiling. He continued to think about his role, and on the front lines, his task was to bolster the units. If he had enough strength, he would assist in scouting, predicting traps and routes. Wim understood that his responsibility was immense, because if he made a mistake, the progress of the entire team could be seriously affected. Abel turned to ask if he was nervous, but Wim denied it, saying he had prepared everything he could. However, unexpectedly, Wim knelt down and clutched his stomach, saying that his stomach was upset. Abel looked at him and calmly remarked that he was indeed vomiting. Wim tried to apologize and told Abel that everything would be all right, that he was okay. Wim told himself he needed to calm down. He repeated once more that he should divide the situation into 2 phases. Wim then began explaining the movement and combat phases. Abel assured him that everything would be fine. He hadn't made a single mistake during training. Abel said that he trusted Wim, and in return, he hoped Wim could also rely on them. Abel smiled and went on to say that he would protect Wim, even if it meant facing the floor boss. He would endure a little hardship and show Wim what he could do. This shocked Wim. He thought about how he and Abel practiced together every morning, sometimes even just chatting casually. So he wondered if this could be called friendship, but he still wasn't entirely sure. Maybe he'd invite him out for a meal or something. Wim called Abel, but when Abel answered, Wim panicked and wondered what he should say next time. They should go eat. But at that moment, Wim was startled to hear someone say welcome to him. Abel asked him what was wrong, and Wim replied that it was just a bug. He thought he heard that every time he went into the labyrinth. Over the public address system, a voice boomed, directing the frontline team to form a bident formation. Wim quickly confirmed the order and agreed. Abel then shouted that they would begin advancing. As the Aniclimax team continued deeper into the labyrinth, they passed several monsters undetected. While moving, Wim heard the familiar announcement. Enemy detected, a Class B Hydra. Wim immediately paid attention and said he would check as well. He thought of the Hydra, a type of monster that usually lives near water sources. Looking around, he noticed that the walls on this floor had a damp texture, indicating a large amount of groundwater, most likely due to flowing water veins in the area. Not only were there many common fish species, but there were also bird-like creatures, and a few new species that appeared to be semi-aquatic. Over the communication channel, Wim announced that he would be in charge of searching the right side and the underground area, and requested Bettina to continue in charge of the left and front areas. Bettina confirmed that she understood. Wim added that the road ahead was gradually sloping downwards, so caution was needed when drawing the map. Bettina agreed and said that was true and that it was clearly shown on the map as well. Meanwhile, Wim continued to observe and analyze. Abel stood beside him, silently thinking about how many hypotheses Wim had come up with and how much detailed verification he had done in such a short time. He was working far more than he was supposed to be doing. Abel continued to think that the maps Wim drew were highly detailed and accurate. With this quality, the resale value of the maps would increase many times over. Wim, meanwhile, was confused, wondering whether he should continue casting the spell or release it. But if he did that, before he could finish thinking, Wim suddenly started vomiting from exhaustion. Abel quickly offered him some water and reminded him to stay hydrated. Wim thanked him and apologized for getting so caught up in his thoughts. At that moment, Hans approached Wim and Abel, announcing that the leader was calling them. Abel told Hans that, according to Wim's estimate, there was a large hall ahead. Upon hearing this, Hans suggested that if that were the case, they should discuss the next steps there. As the three stood with the other members of Nacht Libelle, Hans remarked that, without a doubt, whichever path they chose, a vast hall lay ahead. He added that there was a smell of water in the air, possibly from a lake or a flowing river. Hans suggested replenishing the water supply as soon as possible, then asked Wim if he could analyze the water quality. Wim replied that he had previously seen a species of butterfly that could only survive in places with clean water, so the water quality here could be considered safe for now. Camilla then declared that everyone had shared enough information. She asked if anyone had anything else to add. Wim began to tremble. Abel noticed and called out his name, asking if there was anything he hadn't told him. Camilla gently urged him to just say it. Wim explained that the slope in this area was a bit unusual. Up until the beginning of the trip, the terrain had mostly been downhill, but at this point it started to slope up a bit. Camilla nodded, indicating she understood. Wim went on to analyze that if the path was sloping towards the water source, that made sense. But he suspected this might be a trap not found on the other levels. Camilla speculated. If it was a slope, there might be rocks rolling down. No, worse, it could very well be a trap that would drown the whole team. Wim agreed with Camilla's reasoning and said that, in the worst-case scenario, if the uphill slope continued to lengthen and the water continued to pour in, the entire area behind them could be completely flooded. Once trapped in the labyrinth, submerged, and if the floor boss were to appear and attack, the situation would be extremely dangerous. The entire team began to waver at Wim's analysis. Seeing this, he quickly apologized and said that it was all just hypothesis and asked everyone not to worry too much. Camilla was furious at this point and she called out his name. Wim bowed his head and continued to apologize for making the whole group worry, but Camilla immediately countered, saying that wasn't the case. How many times had something like this actually happened between them? Your tendency to blame yourself and overthink things has contributed to your growth, but now you're going too far. You shouldn't be holding yourself back like this. She further asserted that he also has the right to live the way he wants. Wim was moved by those words and sincerely thanked Camilla. He then recounted that the investigation continued smoothly without encountering any battles with large monsters. Moreover, they discovered many valuable gold veins. At this point, the profit from this labyrinth expedition was assured. They were sure to reap a windfall. Everything was going too smoothly. To the point that Wim began to suspect something. Were they being lured deeper into a labyrinth? The way things were progressing was making them suspicious. Camilla then announced that this labyrinth expedition was expected to last a week. However, in a short time, they had already achieved very significant results. Although the previous issue with the slope still made her feel a little uneasy, turning back was now impossible. Simon spoke up emphatically, Uswite. They were Nacht Libelle, after all. How could they just turn back because they felt something was unusual? Mark agreed, saying that if they returned now, they would have to leave behind too many black maps. Wim silently repeated, the black map. A dark corner of Fullbrown. It involves luring people under a magical spell into a labyrinth, forcing them to transmit location data and information for map making until they die. A cruel reality, one that shouldn't exist. Yet in Full Brown's underworld, these maps are bought and sold at exorbitant prices. Camilla believes that if they were to back down midway through a large-scale investigation, the demand for black maps would immediately skyrocket. They've always been proud that it never happened. And it can't happen this time either. To prevent that, Camilla told the Aniclimax team that they were forming a vanguard. Wim thought to himself, now they were only a short distance from the Great Hall. Given the potential risks ahead, splitting the men into vanguard teams was the best option to minimize danger. This mission obviously had to be undertaken by the most elite members of Aniclimax. He wondered who would be chosen. Camilla then announced that the following 6 people would be joining the vanguard. Camilla began calling out the names: Hans, vice captain; Abel, captain of the shield squad; Monica, captain of the mage squad; Bettina, deputy head of the reconnaissance team; Haida Marie, candidate for executive member; and finally, Wim, temporary member. Wim was surprised to hear his name called and asked why he was on the team, while Haida Marie was delighted, saying that he had done it, and it was a remarkable achievement. Wim could only wonder if it was because of the team's balance, and thought the burden of this responsibility was too great. Camilla said she put her trust in everyone while Wim was still worried about what she should do. He whispered that a large-scale investigation was underway on the 98th floor of the labyrinth, led by Aniclimax, with the goal of reaching the Grand Hall where a potential underground water source might exist. A team of 6 people, the Vanguard now, was formed, and for some reason, he was one of them. Wim used a power-up spell on the remaining 5 people, increasing their strength. Monica happily said that it felt wonderful. Her body felt so light. Wim explained that he applied the speed boost to help the team quickly reach the Grand Hall. If combat ensued, he would add other enhancements if they agreed. Monica took Wim's hand and exclaimed how wonderful it was, saying she had long wished to experience such a spell and was deeply moved. Wim, feeling awkward, could only reply that it was nothing special. At that moment, Haida Marie approached and separated Monica from Wim, angry that she was standing too close to him. She asked Monica to keep her distance. Monica was surprised and didn't understand what was happening, and she called Haida Marie Marie-chan. This made Haida Marie even angrier, and she yelled that Monica was being too intimate with Wim and, moreover, that she shouldn't arbitrarily add the suffix chan to her name. Monica sadly said that was impossible, then asked if they weren't friends. Haida Marie became angry and shouted that no, they weren't friends. She was her enemy. She was Cow B, which left Monica completely bewildered. Hans then stepped between Haida Marie and Monica, thanking them for their harmony, and skillfully brought the argument to a halt. He went on to say that even though this was their first time forming a team, he still had great confidence in their abilities. Hans turned to ask Bettina if the route had been decided yet, and Bettina confirmed that it had. She explained that they would choose the shortest route and try to avoid combat as much as possible. Hans then told Wim that if he still had the strength, he wanted him to help with the reconnaissance, and Wim agreed, saying he would do his best. But soon after, Wim started vomiting due to the pressure. Abel immediately gave him some water to drink. Hans laughed and said it felt like he was a teacher leading his students on a field trip, and Bettina secretly thought that was exactly right. A little while later, Hans and the whole team were running through the maze, and he began to realize that perhaps it was thanks to Wim's enhancement spell, because despite running at such high speed, no one felt tired at all. In this situation, they might soon reach the Great Hall. But suddenly Bettina screamed, demanding to be turned to the right. Hans asked if it was because there was a monster, but Bettina replied, no, it was a trap. Hans thought to himself that this was exactly what the Survey Corps had learned from Wim, the ability to detect traps. In her flashback, Bettina recalled Wim giving her a stack of documents and saying they contained trap data. Bettina told Hans that when Wim showed her the reconnaissance data about the traps, she couldn't believe her eyes. This is a new hypothesis about how to classify traps. If statistical analysis is performed on each level of the traps, a general pattern may be discovered. Back in the present, Bettina shouted that monsters had been spotted ahead, and Hans declared that battle was inevitable. He ran toward the monster and attacked it with his sword. Hans said it was difficult to see and realized the monster was still alive. Meanwhile, Monica rushed forward, shouting, "Give it to me!" However, as Monica prepared to attack the monster, Wim shouted at her to hold back her attack. Monica immediately understood and used the loading spell to keep her output stable. She chanted a spell that the sorceress Monica would accept, Wim's enhancement. Meanwhile, Wim made adjustments, slowing her down, narrowing her range, and then applying a power boost to her. Monica then declared the start and unleashed her Dunning-Kruger electric shot. Lightning bolts struck the monster. After the attack landed, Monica was astonished to realize that all the shots had hit their target. Wim explained that he had adjusted the magic range accordingly, which thrilled Monica, who praised it as amazing. Hans asked Wim in surprise if he could enhance weapons, and Wim replied that he could. Hans then chanted that the swordsman Hans accepted Wim's enhancement spell, while Wim used magic to maximize the sword's strength and hardness without changing its weight. Hans approached the monster and told them to finish it off. Then he used the Najigiri technique and slashed fiercely at the monster with his sword. Hans stood frozen in shock as the monster fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Wim and the others started cheering and celebrating while Hans remained standing, still in shock. He thought that the feeling of striking the monster just now was like cutting through air. The blade was too sharp. So this was the effect of Wim's enhancement. No wonder Camilla praised him so highly. Wim complimented Hans, saying he was amazing, but at that moment Bettina spotted something unusual on the map and shouted that there was another monster above them. A second monster suddenly appeared from above, directly above Wim and Monica. Wim reacted quickly, activating the instant Dramer enhancement ×3 spell. Then he struck the monster hard with his machete. Hans exclaimed how impressive it was, while Heidemarie praised Wim for doing a great job. Abel nodded and said that it was exactly as expected. Wim humbly thanked everyone and said that things would be fine if they were just low-level monsters like that. Hans was skeptical, unsure if this was truly a low-level species as it appeared to be a new one. Upon examining the monster, he discovered a necklace caught in its teeth, and sadly remarked that it probably belonged to explorers who had come before them. Hans said they didn't have time to build a tomb, but at least they should pray for them. Everyone responded in unison that they understood. Wim believed that whether on the move or in combat, everyone could think and act independently, and the coordination between members was very smooth. This reminded him of Dragon's Wings, where things never went so smoothly. Once again, he realized he was in a great team. After that, Wim and the others continued forward and reached a large lake. Hans scooped up some water, confirming that, as Wim had predicted, this was indeed the Great Hall, and the water quality in the pool seemed stable. Hans added that this place could absolutely become a supply point for expeditions on floor 98. Then turned to praise Wim for doing a good job. Abel also smiled and applauded, saying that it was indeed a great achievement. However, Wim still refused to take credit, saying that he was only an assistant. Heidemarie was annoyed. She told Wim he should learn to accept compliments, and then she asked him why he was always so insecure. Wim replied that he had no fondness for feeling insecure at all, and begged her to believe that he wasn't like that. But Heidemarie became even angrier, shouting that yes, Wim, who had been kicked out of his old team, was being invited into a high-ranking team just because he was her friend. A fool who was abusing her authority and influencing the entire organization. That's what she meant, and Wim simply replied that it was true. Wim realized that Heidemarie was right. Meanwhile, Abel called him, and Wim thanked him. Abel simply replied that he was welcome, which made Heidemarie smile gently. Wim later recounted that after confirming the Great Hall area was secure, the main army also joined them. Camilla declared that with such a large amount of water in the Great Hall, they no longer needed to worry about traps. She praised Wim and the other members for doing a great job. Wim went on to recount that the Great Hall was now identified as the official transit point for Nacht Lebel, and they would be staying there for a night, using it as a temporary base. Later, Heidemarie peeked at Wim from behind a rock and told him to go to sleep. Wim agreed, but said there was still something bothering him. Looking at the map, he realized that the entire slope of the journey had decreased and then increased again until they reached this Great Hall. He thought to himself that this place looked like a wasteland on the surface of the earth, with a cave ceiling so high that it seemed to stretch on endlessly. What really worried Wim was that if somehow a large amount of water flooded in, the path they had traveled would be completely submerged, and they would be unable to return. Considering the whole situation, if this room is indeed a trap, they will drown if they try to escape. Eventually, the entire room will be submerged, and no matter what they do, there will be no way out. Wim couldn't find any viable way out of the situation. However, the current planned routes were all relatively well controlled, and overall there were no signs of water-related traps, so at least they still knew an escape route. He told himself he should go to sleep. Worrying about things like this wouldn't help. Besides, how could a large flood suddenly inundate the area? Thinking about it like that is pointless. But while Wim was sleeping, it started to rain. He jumped up, startled. A voice rang out, announcing for everyone to wake up immediately. It was raining right inside the labyrinth. Wim was stunned, thinking that this was completely unexpected and impossible. A member of the Nachtly Bell frantically asked why it was raining inside the labyrinth. While one person wondered if it was a trap, another screamed in panic, asking what the hell was going on. Wim was almost in a panic, wondering who could have foreseen this and what was really happening. He thought the situation was getting worse. The rain was getting heavier, blurring visibility. With this much rain, the water was pouring down in torrents. An old man exclaimed in horror, "Could it be that they can't turn back now?" and asked what they should do. Another person shouted to Camilla that the southern passage was completely flooded. But Camilla remained calm and told the person not to panic, to hold their position. She emphatically declared that they could no longer retreat. The labyrinth had trapped them in this worst-case scenario. They had to prepare to confront a monster guarding the floor while simultaneously desperately searching for an escape route. Camilla then shouted to the entire Nachtly Bell that now was the time to prove their true worth. Everyone had to be ready to fight. The members of Nachtly Bell were all inspired and unanimously responded to her words. Wim thought to himself, how amazing. Everyone's fear has now transformed into determination. Meanwhile, Heidemarie said that this was an act of Nachtly Bell, and now they should also get excited. Sometime later, Mark shouted that nothing unusual had been found in the East Corridor. Abel also reported nothing in the West, and another person said that the South Corridor showed no signs of anything either. Suddenly, Bettina shouted that something was approaching from the North Corridor. She couldn't see its full shape clearly, but it was most likely the monster guarding the floor. Camilla immediately shouted orders to the logistics team that as soon as they received reinforcements from Wim, they must attack immediately. The logistics team took their positions simultaneously. Wim, on the other hand, uses enhancement spells with hardening and vibration effects on his teammates. A monster began to emerge from above. Hans remarked that it was too dark to see clearly, but it was certainly enormous. Camilla asked Wim to increase his power, and he agreed. Wim uses magic to adjust stiffness, vibration, and air resistance, then comprehensively enhances the logistics team. The logistics team simultaneously unleashed area of effect attack skills such as Lightning Strike and Javer Spear, launching them all towards the monster. But Bettina realized the target hadn't been taken down yet. Something was wrong. It was transforming. It was a multitude of tentacles, and she screamed a warning to everyone. It was coming. Camilla shouted to the shield team, and they all responded in unison while Wim empowered them with a counterattack effect. Mark excitedly shouted that they would face any number of opponents, no matter how many. Camilla told Heidemarie to shine the light on the target, and Heidemarie shouted that she would leave it to her. Heidemarie remarked that she had seen its body and used flash roar, causing everything to light up brightly. Everyone was shocked when they saw the monster's body, wondering if its size was too enormous. Camilla asked Wim if he recognized what it was, and said it was definitely the floor-guarding monster. Wim replied that it didn't resemble any of the previous guardian monsters. If he had to compare it, it was like a small sea creature about the size of a dugong. Camilla reasoned that if it were a sea creature, then fire would surely be effective. Wim agreed and said the path was still clear. Camilla ordered the logistics team to use fire magic and fire separately. They all responded and began the attack. Heidemarie uses Fireball, Hans uses Flamethrower, and Monica unleashes Blazing Hot Wind. The monster took a series of blows while Camilla watched and remarked that the attacks were effective. She shouted that even cutting the tentacles would cause damage. The frontline team coordinated with the shield team to defend against the tentacle attacks while counterattacking the monster's main body. Camilla further instructed that the logistics team should also split into pairs to intercept and attack independently. She informed Wim that he didn't need to maintain the enhancements for anyone outside the shield team, and you should save some of your energy to focus on defense. Taking his position, Abel shouted that they could do it. Meanwhile, Mark called Wim to encourage him. Wim replied that he understood and began maintaining the enhancement only for the shield team. Wim secretly recounted that from that moment on, the scene was magnificent. In response to the magic of the defenders, the front line moved through the gaps. Employing a hit-and-run tactic, they gradually wore down the boss's strength. Wim went on to recount that everything was meticulously calculated, like observing a game of chess. And there, even though it was raining heavily, they should have been completely in enemy territory. But the situation turned in their favor. Wim thought that being able to repel the boss to this extent on their first encounter was proof of the true strength of a top-tier, full-brown team. At that moment, Camilla called out to Wim. She drew her sword and announced that she would enter the battle. She told him to enhance her to the fullest extent, without holding back anything. She smiled and said, as usual, that she put her trust in him. Wim agreed. Camilla has announced she has accepted the enhancement from Grandor Wim. Meanwhile, the other members noticed her and said that the captain had gone into battle. Wim performs optimal enhancement to synchronize with Camilla and transfer the spell to her. Seeing Camilla charging forward, Mark instructed everyone to retreat and not get in the captain's way. Wim stood watching while Camilla thought she intended to end it all with one blow, because bosses often have hidden tricks up their sleeves. Therefore, if possible, it's best to defeat them immediately before they even see those moves. Camilla shouted that it was time to act. This was the moment to put all the results of their training to the test. She recalled that a few years ago she had been proud of having trained her body to the extreme and mastered magic. But then she realized that there were limits to it. Camilla completed her 1,022nd training session and muttered that it was still the same as before. She gritted her teeth in frustration and anger, saying that there had been no progress. Camilla added that if she couldn't improve further, then as a leader she would dedicate herself to commanding and leading others. But at that moment, as a warrior, she would have died. However, she accepted that reality. Back in the present, Camilla stepped forward among the other team members, who announced that the captain had gone into battle and would be entrusting everything to her. Camilla thought that with each enhancement Wim received, the enhancement spell became more and more refined, naturally integrating into her body. For someone who had once believed she had reached the limits of her potential, these enhancements gave her hope. Camilla looked at the monster and continued to think that Wim probably didn't know how much she valued him. As they recall the moment their paths first intersected, she felt the exhilaration of a warrior, and that very moment made her feel reborn. Then Camilla summoned Coyote Jerry, and a large bolt of lightning appeared on her sword. Wim was astonished and remarked that this lightning strike was even more powerful than the previous battle with Wyvern. Han said that luckily this level has a skylight, so the captain's abilities wouldn't be limited. Camilla charged straight towards the monster, preparing to unleash her slashing attack. Haida Marie exclaimed in shock that the monster was much bigger. Camilla felt her body become incredibly light, and she smiled, thinking that in this state she could slash with all her might. This feeling was truly blissful. One of the Nachtli Bell members shouted that they had to retreat further, as the captain was fighting without restraint. They had to be careful not to be caught in the crossfire. Camilla used her Coyote Jinjiri skill and sliced the monster in half. Wim stood watching with the other members and exclaimed in amazement at that power. Meanwhile, the monster collapsed to the ground in pieces. Everyone stood frozen in shock before beginning to cheer and celebrate, but Wim still worried, thinking it wasn't over yet. At that moment, Simon cautiously announced that the target's biological response had not yet disappeared. Camilla immediately shouted a warning to everyone not to let their guard down and to continue the attack. Haida Marie immediately used Fireball to attack the monster, while Abel used Void Cut. The attacks blew the monster apart. The members of Nachtli Bell stood there anxiously. While Simon looked at his screen and happily announced that there was no reaction from the goal, the victory was theirs. All the members were overwhelmed with happiness and began cheering in celebration. They cheered that they had defeated the level leader on their very first expedition, which was unbelievable. A historic moment had just been made. As expected, they are Nachtli Bell. They did it. When they return, they will throw a celebration. The biggest party ever. Meanwhile, Wim stood motionless, bewildered, wondering what was happening. Was it really over? If defeating the boss of the next level was that easy, then... But then he immediately dismissed that thought. It wasn't easy at all, and they simply eliminated the monster before it could become a threat. This was a natural outcome thanks to Nachtli Bell's quick and precise actions. Even so, he still felt uneasy. Just then, Abel ran up from behind and called his name. Wim turned around and smiled. But as he walked toward Abel, he slipped on the mud. Abel warned him to be careful because the water level was rising due to the heavy rain. Wim bowed his head sadly, but Abel noticed and asked what was wrong. Wim thought that along with the rain, the leader of the floor would also suddenly appear and attack. He wondered if it had the potential to make it rain, but he immediately decided not to jump to conclusions. Thinking too much wouldn't do any good at this moment. Abel helped him to his feet. Wim thanked him, then quickly switched on the communication channel to inform Camilla that it was Wim. While Camilla asked Wim what was wrong, Wim told her that due to the rain, the water level was rising, so the semi-aquatic monsters would be more active. He added that they can move faster in water while their speed of movement decreases. Camilla noted that the crisis was not over and asked Wim if that was what he meant, to which he confirmed. Camilla smiled and said that he was absolutely right and apologized for getting too excited earlier. Given the current situation on this level, the results achieved are sufficient. They should withdraw. She asked Wim if he had any plans to withdraw, and he confirmed that in the narrow passage to the northwest, there might be a place where they could avoid the floodwaters. But the distance is quite far, and with such a large group, it might take quite a while. Suddenly, Wim was surprised and wondered why he was still trembling. As Wim and the Aniclimax group were making their way through the heavy rain, they heard a sound coming from behind them. Abel and Wim turned around, their faces bewildered, while Abel wondered what the sound was, what kind of noise it was. At that very moment, a gigantic monster emerged from the water, causing the members of Aniclimax to stare in horror. Wim thought to himself that in that instant, everyone understood that this was the real boss of this floor. Many other monsters began to appear, while the other members fearfully said that the one they had just seen was just an ordinary soldier, and wondered if that was really the case. Camilla watched in amazement and exclaimed that it was indeed the 98th floor. This wouldn't be easy. The boss released a plume of black smoke into the sky, leaving everyone stunned and unsure what to do. Simon reported that the rain had severely reduced visibility. He couldn't even determine how many small monsters were approaching. He added that the rain was getting heavier, making it difficult to hear any sounds. This must be the boss's ability. It must possess such power. Meanwhile, Mark announced that 2 small monsters had been confirmed in the west, and another person reported 2 more in the east. Another person from the south confirmed there were 5 children and, trembling, asked what they should do now. Suddenly, Bettina shouted that the north was also surrounded, that they were encircled from all sides, and urged everyone to quickly give orders. Everyone fell into a state of chaos. Hearing this, Wim panicked, thinking the situation was extremely critical. They were in serious trouble. Someone shouted, urging everyone to remain calm. On the general media channel, Camilla ordered the entire team to assemble and take defensive positions. Abel also shouted for everyone to quickly get into defensive formation. Wim thought that no matter the situation, Camilla never lost her composure, which was the quality of a leader. Then the members quickly took their defensive positions, with Wim standing behind them. Wim was worried, not knowing what to do now. The escape route was blocked, making retreat extremely difficult. If they were forced to fight even Aniclimax, could she possibly handle the boss of the floor, along with many smaller monsters at the same time? How far can they fight, and if they retreat, will they be pursued? Suddenly, someone called Wim's name, making him jump. Mark said that he shouldn't be looking down like that. It wasn't in his nature to have such a gloomy expression. He should look around. Seeing Abel and the others ready to fight, Wim wondered if he was the only one panicking. Then Wim shouted with determination, "Yes, I will look ahead." He told himself that he had reconsidered. There was no guarantee they could overwhelm the enemy, but that didn't mean they were at a disadvantage either. He thought they still had enough strength, and so far no one had been injured. Everyone will return safely. From now on, you need to assess the situation and make sure you do what you can. The monsters lunged at Aniclimax. Camilla shouted for defense, and the members quickly responded. Other monsters also attacked simultaneously. Wim hastily reinforced Abel and the rest, while Abel shouted at the members to endure, and they all agreed. Hans commented that there were too many tentacles. Camilla declared that after defending themselves, they would counterattack and strike the boss. A man, frightened, looked at the monsters and asked if that was too much. While Wim watched in silence, Camilla shouted that they were coming. The members began fending off fierce attacks from the monster's tentacles. Wim tried to defend himself, but was still hit. He braced himself and told himself he had to persevere and endure. Camilla shouted to everyone to hold on, and Wim realized that it was her voice that had lifted everyone's spirits. However, Aniclimax suffered serious losses. Wim admitted that the worst-case scenario had occurred, even though they had prepared themselves mentally. Their strength and training were sufficient, but in the end, things still turned out this way. This is the absurdity of the labyrinth. All expectations have become meaningless. Returning with everyone is no longer possible. The enemy was too strong. The first groups to encounter the arena boss were all wiped out. Camilla called Wim and told him that he wasn't officially a member of Aniclimax yet, that he could easily escape on his own, and that no one would blame him for doing so. So she asked if Wim could help her with something, but Wim replied that he couldn't. Camilla apologized, then calmly stated that returning with everyone was no longer feasible. They had to accept that there would be casualties. The focus of the current plan was on her and Wim. She asked him to listen carefully. Wim replied, and Camilla told him to channel all his enhanced power into her, and she would defeat the monster. Wim panicked, but Camilla continued that no further assistance was needed. They would split into groups of 3 and disperse when the opportunity arose. And if possible, Wim should show the others the way to safety. Wim shouted, asking her to wait a moment. But Camilla interrupted him and walked toward the monster, saying as she went that she would take responsibility, that everything would be all right, because there were still many talented people in Nachtliebe. Wim yelled at her to stop because Camilla seemed to be... But Camilla interrupted him again and said that if Heidemarie, Abel, and Wim joined Nachtliebe, the group's future would surely be secure. Looking toward Wim, Camilla pleaded earnestly and declared that she accepted Wim's enhancement. Wim burst into tears and cast a spell on her. Camilla then made an announcement on public channels asking all members to pay attention and declaring that this would be her final message. This battle was ordered. She would confront the boss on this floor. After assisting the wounded, the groups should split into teams of 3 and, when the opportunity arose, find a way to retreat. She had entrusted Wim with the escape route. Camilla then thanked everyone for everything, causing one member to yell, "No way," and ask what she intended to do, but Camilla cut off communication. The member said, stunned, that the connection had been cut off. Camilla looked up and thought, strangely she felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She stared intently at the floor boss, introduced herself as Camilla, and acknowledged the other party as the owner of that floor. But with all due respect, she will take its life. Camilla yelled for the floormaster to come out and prepare to die, then lunged at it with her sword. She charged straight at floormaster and slashed at its tentacles with her sword. Camilla wondered if it would let her deliver the fatal blow, and what if it ran out of time. Drawing out a scythe, Camilla asserted that it was a high-grade weapon, and launched an attack on floormaster. She ran closer to it, ordered it to burst into flames, and wondered what was happening. Her body moved effortlessly without feeling tired. She felt she could push her limits endlessly. Camilla wondered if this was really her, if she was the same person who used to be so stagnant and emotionless. She screamed that this was, and continued to doubt whether it was really her. Then, Camilla leaped towards Floormaster, believing she could do it, that she could fight on equal terms. She began engaging Floormaster in direct combat, continuing to think that she would sever all of its tentacles, then deliver the decisive blow to its main body. Meanwhile, Wim observed and thought to herself that it was amazing. Even though she had become unreasonably strong, she didn't waver at all. This battle was like a legendary fairy tale. This was the ultimate display of the strongest warrior of full brown, Camilla. He put all his energy into it. He couldn't let the time Camilla had dedicated to him go to waste. He will follow her orders, assist everyone, and then withdraw. Meanwhile, while Heidemarie was treating Mark, Wim appeared and ran to her. When she saw Wim, she called his name and told him that she trusted him. Wim remarked that the area seemed safe, and Heidemarie replied that Hans appeared to be safe. But the situation of the second reconnaissance team was not good. She started walking and asked Wim to come along, and he agreed and followed. As he walked, Wim thought this was really troublesome. His body felt heavy. Of course, it was due to exhaustion, but not only that, his legs felt incredibly heavy, as if something was weighing them down. Kronos' words from the past echoed in his mind, that he was useless, that he should obey his superiors. Wim recognized that feeling, the feeling of his time in Dragon's Wings. He wondered why he was thinking about that at this moment, and realized he didn't have time to be distracted. Heidemarie called Wim in a very angry tone. Meanwhile, Wim recalled Camilla's words that retreating in battle didn't guarantee safety, that he should just do what he could. He also remembered Camilla complimenting him on how much he had improved, to which he had simply replied that he was fine. Wim thought he couldn't shake these thoughts and wondered why he hadn't felt this way before. He recalled the time Camilla asked him about 500 pounds of milk, then asked him to demonstrate his fighting skills, and also when she invited him to eat with her. Then, Wim told himself he had to concentrate and just follow orders. He counted down 3, 2, 1, as always, without thinking, just following Camilla's instructions and stepping forward. When Heidemarie grabbed his shoulders and yelled at him to look at her, calling him an idiot, Wim was confused. She said she would show him what his face looked like right now. She said he was freezing up, and that smile was exactly the same as when he belittled himself in front of that piece of trash Kronos. She asked him what he was thinking and told him to stop avoiding the issue and think things through carefully. Heidemarie then asked Wim what he was thinking and said that he was doubting himself, but Wim remained silent. Meanwhile, Camilla is still battling the Guardian of the Floor. Mark and the other members shouted that they could do it if they went with their captain, while Hans yelled that no one should give up. Camilla continued fighting the monster, then she noticed its attacks had temporarily stopped. She thought this was the perfect opportunity, one she couldn't let slip away. A massive bolt of lightning enveloped her sword, and Camilla yelled at the floor guardian to take everything she had, then unleashed her decisive blow. She used a manhunt tactic to fend off counterattacks, and told herself that it was a good thing. But then Camilla was horrified to discover that one tentacle was still intact, and realized she had to dodge the next attack. However, the monster struck her. Wim and Haida-Marie were terrified when they saw that. Wim immediately used the temporary acceleration spell, tripling his motor skills. Then he saw Camilla falling from a great height. He immediately rushed to catch her and shouted Abel's name. Abel was bewildered, not understanding what was happening, and just as Camilla was about to fall to the ground, Wim rushed over and caught her. He frantically called out Camilla's name. The guardian of the layers attempted to attack them from behind, but Abel quickly counterattacked, blocking the blow with his shield. Abel shouted that he would hold it back. Wim thanked her and set Camilla down on the ground. He anxiously asked if she was all right, if she could still hear him. Then he realized that her bones were broken in many places. Her body was covered in blood, and even her internal organs were damaged. Camilla gradually regained consciousness and asked if anyone else had survived. Wim replied that they were all still here. They couldn't retreat. He said that no one had to sacrifice their lives yet, and hoped they could all return together. But Camilla laughed when she heard that and said he was too young. She added that the young, healthy people should retreat and leave behind those who are injured like her. Wim was frightened when he heard that and said that couldn't be true. Camilla said that if she had his enhancement, she could at least act as a meat shield. But Wim shouted in denial, saying it wasn't true. Camilla saw the other members still fighting and told Wim that she still couldn't give up. She pleaded with Wim for help and declared that she, Camilla, accepted the enhancement from the mage Wim. Wim thought that even mere suspicion was a waste of precious time. It's a waste of Camilla's life. No matter how many teammates have to be sacrificed, the majority of the group will surely perish. He continued to think that at full brown he didn't fit in with a good group of adventurers. He wasn't the kind of person they considered normal. He vaguely realized that he was someone who deserved to be left out. But Camilla and everyone in full brown is someone who needs protection. No matter how many times he dies, he can't atone for his mistakes. These are wonderful people who have accepted you for who you are. They are people worthy of respect. Wim continued to think there was still one last hope, and announced on the public broadcast channel, "Everyone, this is Wim." A statement that left everyone bewildered. Wim said he was very sorry and that he would disobey the order. Abel frantically called out his name, while Wim said that this might not be the best option, but it was the best option he could offer. This is the only way you have, so it's okay. You have no other choice. Wim declared that he would halt Lord of the Levels, and informed everyone that they should seize the opportunity and retreat. Camilla asked what was happening. Meanwhile, Wim used Hurt's Stalemate and told her that it was a debuff called Hurt's Stalemate. He told Camilla that he would defeat the Lord of the Levels, and she remarked that there was finally something good about him. Wim thought there was no turning back and wondered why this was happening. Normally, he despised such unusual actions. He remembered Haida-Marie and Camilla's words. They had told him he was free to live life his own way, and now he understood. They had indeed told him that. Then, Wim used Transition Puppet Master and prepared for battle. Camilla called out Wim's name and asked what he was doing. Wim replied that defeating that guy was his mission. As Wim stepped forward, Haida-Marie asked if he was coming, and Wim replied with a simple, "Yes." She smiled and told him touchingly that she understood. She added that he had become very bold, but he was still the same, always complaining and suspicious. But Wim interrupted Haida-Marie and smiled, saying it was time to say goodbye. Then he bid her farewell. Haida-Marie told Wim not to worry, that he had enough strength to win. Wim anxiously told her not to worry too much, that he was just trying to stall for time like last time. He added that this time the opponent was much stronger than the previous leader of this floor, and he wondered if there was something strange about it because his emotions were surging. Haida-Marie observed that Wim was trembling slightly and asked if he was scared. Wim replied that perhaps so, since feeling scared is natural when you're gambling with your life. But Haida-Marie thought that the emotion Wim was feeling was probably not fear. Then Wim said he would leave now because there was no more time. Haida-Marie nodded and told him to be careful. Deep down, Haida-Marie thought that he still didn't truly understand himself. She believed she understood him even better than he understood himself. And one day, you will surely understand yourself better than anyone else in the world. When that happens, she wants you to tell her everything. She once said she knew everything about him, but in reality, there were still things she didn't know. While Wim smiled, Marie wondered why he could smile at a time like this. Meanwhile, the tentacles of the floor leader began to regenerate. One team member complained that the tentacles the captain had painstakingly cut off had grown back, while others were angry, feeling they were mocking them once again. Wim realized the water level had risen significantly and quickly moved forward. He understood that they needed to resolve this as quickly as possible because if the water rose any higher, the monster's movements would become even faster. He wondered how he could help everyone in this situation. Standing before the floor leader, Wim raised his head, clenched his fists, and asserted, of course, he would do his best. He told himself that in his role as a specialized support person, he could strengthen many things, especially parts of the human body. However, the difficulty will vary depending on the part being reinforced. The easiest parts to reinforce are bone and muscle, and most reinforcements are completed in just 1 or 2 treatments. But if you want to go beyond that limit, such as regulating blood flow to deliver oxygen or enhancing heart function, then you'll need to delve into an invisible realm. And that requires strengthening the body's central core. Therefore, very few people can perform this technique. However, there is still one area where reinforcement is completely forbidden, even beyond the heart, and that is the brain. In a flashback, Wim is reading a book and wondering if this is hopeless, given the sparse descriptions of brain reinforcement in the book. Wim read that despite many attempts, no one had truly completed it. He said that the region controlling consciousness could have its processing speed increased if possible. Combat capabilities can be significantly improved, but this comes with an extremely high level of risk. Strengthening someone else's brain is nearly impossible, even for someone with enhanced abilities but weak combat skills. Even if they could strengthen their own brain, it wouldn't offer much practical benefit. Wim wondered if anyone would be willing to risk their life just to try that. He thought back to the scene where Kronos had yelled at him, telling him not to bother, to get out of the way and let him finish things. At that time, Wim could only bow his head in apology and beg for forgiveness. Back in the present, Wim declares that if he wants to gain power, this is the only way left. He uses the transition puppet master skill, which directly affects his brain, causing a flood of memories to rush back. When Wim transformed, he exclaimed, "Yes, that's it." Wim recounted that brain-enhancing procedures are extremely dangerous, and if not done carefully, users could lose consciousness. In fact, continuing to increase the processing speed of the brain, which is already very fast, can overload it. But what he was actually doing was very simple. He just needed to become acutely aware of his own consciousness. And then he repeated the process of asking and answering questions to himself. He adjusted his senses and finally set the multiplier, just before he felt overwhelmed. A subtle adjustment, not exceeding the limit to avoid losing consciousness, but still reaching the highest limit he could handle. The current multiplier was 1.1 times. This was his limit. The side effects may manifest as brain damage, but it's possible. Absolutely possible. He steers himself toward realizing all the hypotheses he's already theorized, in a mind that's been accelerated beyond recognition. That's the transition puppet master. Wim was ready to fight, and the monster lunged at him. Caught in the middle of a battle with the floor leader, Wim thought the situation was dire and wondered if he had just died. He recounted that the scene seemed to slow down in a strange way. He continued fighting, slicing off the tentacles with his machete and charging toward the giant monster. The leader of the floor launched an attack, but Wim dodged it. The members of Nachtliebel witnessed it all in stunned silence. Wim continuously dodged attacks and used his instant enhancement skill with a 20 times multiplier. He was surprised and wondered why everything seemed so slow. He can feel his entire body. He knows the best way to act. You understand the perfect timing. He could feel every tiny movement of each muscle fiber, breaking it down into milliseconds. Wim continued to think that strong people train to win 10 out of 10 times. But weaklings like you must focus on seizing that 1 in 100,000 magical moment, a perfect coincidence, and pour all your energy into it. It's not just about achieving success, but about making success happen. Wim told himself that to dodge this attack, he had no choice but to jump with such force. Therefore, he strengthened the elasticity of the ligaments. He continued to fight, believing he had to constantly search for a miracle, a 1 in 100,000 moment, or he would die. Meanwhile, Camilla was watching Wim and exclaimed in horror, "What just happened? He just jumped into the air." Hidamari was also astonished and remarked that it seemed as though he had neutralized the momentum of the backward slash. a movement that would normally cause damage to joints or ligaments. She wondered if it was an achievement only possible with a body that had been enhanced. Camilla remarked that those movements were beyond human comprehension. Meanwhile, Hidamari yelled at Wim that he could live his life the way he wanted. Wim grinned broadly, thinking he had done it. He had overcome an extremely low probability, witnessing countless miracles happening among 1 in a million. He no longer fully understood everything, but he still knew that it wasn't enough. He would still die if he made a mistake in judgment, even if it was only a tenth of a second. In that instant, he would be struck by the tentacles and his bones would be broken. However, speed was his ally at this moment. He wondered what to do next, but was surprised to see the floor leader creating a magic circle. Wim was shocked and wondered if it was magic. Wim dodged the attack from the leader of the floor and realized that the monster was also using its own tentacles to attack. It attacked again, making Wim wonder if it would even give him a second's rest. However, Wim continued to dodge and smirk maliciously, thinking that he would avoid them all at all costs. Wim was battling Floormaster while the other members stood frozen in astonishment. One member asked how he did it and another wondered what it was. Abel recounted that it was difficult for all of them to comprehend what was happening before their eyes. He called out Wim's name, the only one currently facing one of the most powerful creatures of the lordly class. With each passing millisecond, a high-speed battle was unfolding. The leader of the airspace relentlessly launched attacks towards Wim, but he dodged them all spectacularly and the blows landed on the monster standing behind him. Wim charged straight towards the floor leader, thinking to himself that this monster could even jump, moving by using water pressure. And at that very moment, its enormous body gently floated in the air. Wim landed on the ground and crawled beneath the floor leader. And he wondered to himself what the hell he was doing. He even felt a disconnect between his own consciousness and his own reason. In the blink of an eye, he performed a series of actions, all happening at a speed far exceeding normal limits. Wim leaped out of the water, thinking that if he didn't get out before the floor leader landed, he would be crushed the moment he hit the ground. He continued to fight with a probability of 1 in tens of thousands, and thought that standing on the brink of death meant he wasn't dead yet. He watched the floor boss and thought it was strange. He had torn his own body apart from the inside, but he hadn't yet reached the internal organs. But when Wim saw a dark figure appear, he exclaimed that it was impossible. Time was running out. He had to retreat. Wim was still fighting the floor leader and thinking to himself that it was unbelievable. Everything was happening exactly as he had imagined. Everything that came to mind he was able to do instantly. As he landed, Wim felt as if his body was on fire, yet his mind was incredibly calm. He wondered if this was a feeling of exhilaration. Wim suddenly realized he had become too caught up in the excitement. The lives of all the members of Nacht Libelle now depended on him. Right now, if he didn't buy enough time, someone could die. He told himself that he couldn't stray from his mission. There was no time left to enjoy himself. He secretly recounted the exhilarating feeling of being close to death. The greater the danger, the more intense the feeling. This is exactly what he had long envisioned. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Wim was surprised and wondered to himself if he was still alive. Meanwhile, other monsters began climbing onto the floor leader's body, and a team member frantically asked what the creature was doing. While Hans shouted that it might be a transformation, the floor leader began to transform while Wim watched in astonishment. He wondered if it was really floating and what the principle behind it was. Magic didn't mean you could do anything. Wim secretly thought that the shapeshifters, the false rulers, always had a final trump card. The previous person did the same thing. That means this time they've been cornered. The floor leader completed his transformation, while Wim smiled coldly and declared that the second round had begun. Mark exclaimed in astonishment that it was a transformation, and no one knew what kind of attack was coming. The young people had to retreat immediately. Mark called after Abel and said that he had his place, but to leave this to the veterans. Abel shouted his refusal, saying he didn't want to do it. As the shield commander, he would block any stray attacks. Mark asked if there was anything else. Abel insisted that there was still a glimmer of hope, that there absolutely had to be. Mark smiled in agreement with Abel and told him not to think about death, to which Abel agreed, saying that he understood. Amidst the fierce battle with the floor leader, Wim felt uneasy about the monster hovering in the air. He suspected that those objects might be support devices, and if they attacked from the air with a wide range, jumping to dodge would no longer be effective. That wasn't enough. He needed more. Wim activated instant enhancement with 50 times the intensity, confirming that this way he could expand his vision beyond its limits. He memorizes everything beyond his sight, processing all the information at once. He felt the pressure building up to the point where he almost fainted. When the floor leader launched a surprise attack, Wim dodged by a hair's breadth and counterattacked with supersonic speed. While fighting, he noticed that he could now see everything. Every reflection, every shadow cast on the water's surface, even the tentacles and attacks from blind spots. Tentacle 377, Blade 490, Spearhead 55, Flying Bullets 1020, including what's beyond your sight. Upon seeing an attack coming, Wim went on to say that he could even accurately predict its trajectory. Wim dodged the attack and slashed at the monster with his machete. He chuckled and thought that, as expected, this ruler wasn't making any pointless moves. How wonderful, how interesting. In a state of apparent omnipotence, with a 360-degree view of everything, the feeling that everything was running smoothly filled him with contentment. Wim kept thinking that a single moment of misstep would bring instant death, but that very feeling sent shivers down his spine. It was as if he were negotiating with a supreme power. He wondered if he truly harbored this desire deep within himself, and now he's at his peak performance. And that's the real joy. The floor leader attacked again, but Wim quickly dodged and laughed. He said it was really dangerous, he almost got hit. Meanwhile, Haida Marie was treating Camilla, who thanked her and said that was enough. On the radio, Camilla asked Hans about the progress of the evacuation. Hans replied that there were many projectiles flying towards them. He was doing his best to protect the injured and asked Camilla what they would do to support Wim. Camilla was confused when asked about providing support and said that the battle was happening at such a super fast pace that it was impossible to provide assistance. It would only be a hindrance. She ordered everyone to keep as far away as possible while she would focus on defense. Hans replied that he understood, and Camilla used her great slash to create a shield in front of herself. Camilla then thought that when Wim said he would defeat the high-ranking ruler, she used to think it was just empty talk. But that's not the case. They are actually evenly matched, and Wim has even put his opponent in a difficult position. Therefore, they should put their trust in the young man Wim, because now no one else can interfere in this battle. Meanwhile, Wim continued his battle with the floor leader, telling himself that he hadn't known he had this side to him before. How precious it was to fight without having to think about anything else. He could only defend against its attacks, but he couldn't yet attack its actual body. This will be a war of attrition if it continues like this. Wim told himself he needed to think and said that there was something suspicious about that black mist, something solid within it. A shell. That must be the monster's weak point, perhaps its core or internal organs. If you can break through that shell, you will win. But when Wim discovered a path leading to the creature, he was astonished to realize it was the shortest route to reaching the supreme ruler. He wondered how he had arrived at this conclusion, as he himself didn't understand how the calculation had worked. It must have been a series of inspirations, a series of parallel events overlapping in probability, and a suitable solution that actually came into existence. If you follow this path, you can end the match quickly, as long as you don't make any mistakes. And now that I think about it, maybe he's always been trembling like this. Wim realized that this was his intuition for victory, a path charted among millions of miraculous possibilities. Even though there was a 99.9% chance of him dying, he was now certain he could do it. It looks like a reckless, suicidal act, but if this is the feeling it gives, then it's worth it. Wim continued fighting the monster while the floor boss unleashed a barrage of attacks aimed at him. While Hans watched and wondered if Wim would disappear while suspended in midair, Wim wondered if the rain had stopped, but quickly realized that was because he had jumped above the clouds. As he began to fall from a great height, Wim exclaimed that it was amazing to be so close, and that he would use this momentum to accelerate to maximum speed. Midair, Wim noticed the sound had disappeared. The space became silent as if he were the only one left in the world. He was practically the ruler of this place, and had a strangely exhilarating feeling. Shortly afterward, Wim discovered a barrier and broke through it. He prepared to attack the floor leader. He decided to channel all his remaining strength, reinforcing his body to the maximum extent. He maintained his momentum and crashed straight into the leader's head, pierced and tore its body apart. Wim announced that it was it, the Black Mist, and as he approached, he saw an egg. From there, a bizarre-looking monster appeared. The monster advanced toward Wim and emitted some sounds directed at him. Wim recounted that he didn't understand the meaning of the sounds, but he didn't feel bothered by them either. After a while, Wim began to move away from the floor leader and coughed violently. He turned around and saw Camilla and the others running towards him, which made him happy. Wim thought he had fought to protect everyone, or so he thought, before collapsing unconscious. Everyone called his name anxiously. When Wim slowly opened his eyes, he noticed the rain had stopped. He then recounted the results of the large-scale expedition to the 98th floor of the labyrinth, conducted by the group of night dragonflies. 3 gold veins discovered, 28 new monster species confirmed. And regarding the elimination of the high-ranking leader, a total of 106 people were injured, including 12 seriously injured with no casualties. On the 50th floor, a monster suddenly attacked Kronos, but Kronos quickly dodged the blow. He called out to Nikor, and Nikor replied that she was handling it. She used her explosive crushing skill to attack the monster. Sophia uses a binding spell to restrain the monster, while Kronos tells Melis to get ready. Melis immediately unleashed her fire blanket attack, engulfing the monster in flames. Then Kronos thrust his sword into the monster and sliced it to pieces. Melis excitedly complimented him, saying he was so cool, while Nikor said she knew he could definitely do it. Sophia thought to herself that it was truly an incredible performance. She recounted that with Nikor's wounds healed, Dragon's Wings decided to continue their exploration of the labyrinth. As expected, their coordination has improved significantly compared to before. She was tasked with planning and identifying the enemy, but she had to balance reading maps with other miscellaneous tasks. This made her wonder how they had managed to get this far. Sophia continued to believe that all 3 of them had potential, and their ease in passing this level was proof of that. There's no doubt they really have potential. They just need a little more daring and courage to turn things around in their favor. But operating as a mid-level expedition team, as they currently do, this squad has no future. They have the capability, but the dragon wing that once aspired to glory on the front lines is no more. They simply don't have enough strength to defeat a floor-level boss. While this might sound rude, the truth is this team is severely lacking in power. Later at the Dragon Wings house, Kronos, Melis, Nikor, and Sophia were having dinner together. Melis asked if Nikor was the one cooking today and pointed out that she had forgotten to remove the carrot stems. Nikor quickly apologized while Kronos laughed and said that Nikor was sometimes a little clumsy. He also told Melis that carrot stems were probably nutritious and she should try them, but Melis yelled that she would never eat them, which made Kronos laugh. Sophia sadly thought that it seemed like none of them were really trying to lift the team spirit. It was exhausting to always have to endure this heavy atmosphere. Kronos smiled and asked the girls what they thought if they considered adding more members to the group. He said that by focusing too much on recovering from injury, he had forgotten one thing. They were still a top-tier team, and if they post job openings, there will be no shortage of people wanting to join. Then they can return to the front lines once again. Nikor asked him how many more people he planned to recruit. Kronos replied that, well, having more support staff would certainly be helpful. Perhaps they should hire a few dozen people. He began thinking about how to meet those people, then added that because the current team was all female, they could become targets for those with bad intentions, which made things more difficult. He turned to Melis and asked what she thought about it, which embarrassed her. Kronos smiled while Sophia thought to herself that this was typical of him. He always liked to control things that way. Melis stammered that if it were her, she'd be fine if Kronos was the only male in the team, and she'd feel more at ease if the newcomers were all female. Sophia continued to think and said that this was yet another problem for the team. Currently, the relationships within the team are complicated. Melis likes Kronos, Nikor also likes Kronos, and Kronos has feelings for both of them. If more girls join the crew, there's a high chance Kronos will set his sights on someone else. It's no surprise that Nikor is looking unhappy. Then Sophia called out to Kronos, who asked if she was all right. Sophia explained that she thought it was better to be more cautious about expanding the team. Financial issues, as well as the fact that none of them had experience managing a large group. Kronos then said that if she thought so, she should have just said outright from the start that it couldn't be done. And then the whole team should just do what they could and keep pushing forward. Sophia protested, saying that she didn't mean it that way, but before she could finish, Kronos looked straight at her and asked if he was wrong. Sophia nervously replied that she didn't mean it that way, but Kronos interrupted her, saying that money wasn't an issue. There was always a way to get it. Then, the reward for taking down the floor leader was enormous. Sophia was astonished, wondering if she had forgotten to inform Kronos about this, and if she had overlooked it in her report. Kronos smiled and asked Sophia what was wrong, saying that if she felt uncomfortable talking about it, she could come to his room later. Sophia replied that they had not yet received approval to eliminate the floor leader. According to the records Wim left behind, they needed to send some documents and monster parts as proof. But when she saw Kronos clench his fist in anger, she suddenly realized she had made a mistake. Kronos looked at her with a terrifying gaze and warned her never to mention that name again. Sophia sadly apologized and said that according to the records left by that person, they had submitted all the necessary documents. But they still hadn't received approval and the bonus hadn't arrived either. Hearing this, Mylis asked, "Then wasn't that guy the one who messed everything up?" Sophia replied that she could only guess what had happened, but even if that were the case, they should have received approval by now. So she thought they should postpone it, but before she could finish her sentence, Kronos threw a bottle into the plate of food. Kronos angrily shouted, "Again! That bastard? When will he stop getting in their way?" Mylis quickly told him to calm down, that it wasn't his fault, and Nikor agreed, saying that they were the ones who had eliminated the leader of floor 97, a fact no one could deny. Kronos embraced Nikor and Mylis, while Sophia thought to herself that this was exactly what Dragon Wing had been doing lately, comforting each other while simultaneously portraying Wim Strauss as the villain. Meanwhile, Wim opened his eyes, and seeing this, Haidamari asked if he was awake. He tried to sit up from bed, but felt aches and pains, prompting Haidamari to remind him that he was definitely in pain all over his body and shouldn't exert himself. He lay there with a confused expression, Wim wondering where he was and what he had done. Then, remembering the battle they had been through in the labyrinth, he suddenly jumped out of bed, asking if everyone was all right. Haidamari anxiously asked him again, "Didn't you just tell him not to overexert himself?" Wim replied that if he was here, it meant they had escaped, and because the place looked like a hospital. But before he could finish speaking, Haidamari told him to calm down a bit, then said that several people were seriously injured, but none were in life-threatening condition. She added that Wim had slept for 5 consecutive days and asked if he was still conscious, which shocked Wim when he learned he had been in a coma for so long. Haidamari smiled and said that he had done well. Wim thought to himself, thank God his risking his life was worth it. Haidamari then said that Camilla had told her to call her as soon as Wim woke up and ask if it was okay, and Wim nodded in agreement. As Haidamari reached the door, she turned back to look at Wim, making him slightly flustered, and she asked if he was happy. Wim was momentarily speechless and could only mumble, just a little, which made Haidamari very happy. Then Camilla walked into his room and called his name, which startled him a little. But then she stepped closer and bowed deeply before him. Wim awkwardly asked her to look up, and he didn't know what to say. Camilla thanked him and said that she didn't know how she could ever repay him, but for now, she wanted to express her deepest gratitude. Camilla was so moved that she burst into tears, and she continued to thank Wim. Wim blushed and could only say that he was happy that everyone was okay. Tears streamed down her face as Camilla said that he had risked his life for them, and yet he was still thinking of others. Then, unexpectedly, she hugged him tightly and exclaimed that she didn't know what to do with the overwhelming feeling of gratitude welling up inside her. Wim, surprised, asked if she could be a little gentler. He started feeling suffocated and yelled at Camilla that her armor was making it impossible for him to breathe. Seeing that, Haidamari called out Camilla's name enviously, thinking to herself that she wanted to do the same. But just then, someone entered the room, laughing and saying that Wim was being suffocated by the captain. Mark appeared with Abel, Hans, and Monica, and went on to say that the whole group had come to visit him. Seeing Wim and Camilla like that, Abel was also moved and rushed to hug Wim. Haidamari was stunned and surprised to see Abel hugging her too. Meanwhile, Wim thought to himself that he was really going to die. Monica also declared that it was unfair and that she wanted to hug Wim, but Haidamari immediately stopped her and told her to stay away, as she wasn't allowed to. Monica wondered why it wasn't allowed, while Haidamari yelled that it was because she had said so. Hans then turned to Camilla and asked if it wasn't time to let Wim go, remarking that otherwise Wim wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Camilla agreed with Hans and shouted loudly to get everyone's attention. She said that as they could see, Wim was still recovering, so to avoid exhausting him further, any handshakes or other gestures should be brief. That surprised everyone. Mark asked if her actions contradicted her words, but when Camilla asked if he was saying anything, Mark replied that no. Camilla said, okay, just once each, and immediately afterwards, all the members of Nachtliebel lined up in a long row. One man shook Wim's hand and thanked him. He said that Wim had saved his life. Wim humbly replied that he was only doing his job, but Camilla immediately interrupted it, declaring that time was up. Next person. The man, surprised, said he still had more to say, but Camilla asked if he thought he was the only one. Meanwhile, Abel was also in line, trying to hide his face behind a newspaper. But Camilla recognized him and shouted that it was already his turn. Abel disagreed, saying that turn didn't count, but Camilla insisted it did, adding that she herself had to keep her words brief. Mark interjected, remarking that if Camilla had said any more, Wim might have suffocated, and he interrupted her, saying they should stop there. He had no intention of interrupting her conversation. Mark began pulling Camilla out of Wim's room, insisting that she should also be in the intensive care unit and that they needed to get her back to her room. Camilla reminded the other members that it was only one person at a time, which made Wim laugh. Then, Haida Marie said that since things had finally calmed down, he must be tired and should rest. Wim agreed and thanked her. Wim recalled Simon saying he was amazing, that he had never seen anyone fight like that, and the thanks from the other members for saving their lives. Wim felt that it actually made him very happy. This was the first time so many people had thanked him. He thought it was unbelievable that even someone like him could be so helpful to others. Now all that's left is to officially join Nachtliebel, and with a strong person like Camilla behind him providing support, everything should be fine. Outside Wim's room, 3 men approached and asked if they could speak to him. However, Abel, who was on guard duty, refused them. Wim realized that and said it sounded like some troublesome people wanted to see him, but it seemed like it had been handled well. He went on to say that yes, there are all kinds of people out there. There are people who have thanked him in the past, and there are also people to whom he has sent his thanks. But then Wim stopped, clutched his shirt, and told himself no, he mustn't think like that. He reminded himself that just a little kindness was enough to bring out his true feelings. Wim rejected those thoughts and asserted to himself that no, those were not his true feelings. He didn't think that way. He couldn't be like that. Wim then went back to bed and went back to sleep, while Haida Marie quietly stood outside his room door. At the Adventurers Guild headquarters, Dominic informed a man that Wim had regained consciousness, and the man nodded, indicating he understood. Dominic wondered why they still hadn't received an official report, even though the whole city knew about Nachtliebel defeating the boss on floor 98. He added that rumors were circulating among reporters that the person who killed the monster was a temporary member, and a grantor at that. In any case, there was certainly some truth to it. The man asked if the organization's job was to verify how accurate those things were, and Dominic replied that it was. The man went on to say that he rarely saw Dominic so excited. Then he said they were going to the hospital. What a lucky guy to meet the chairman in person. The guildmaster added that regarding Dragonwing, why didn't they also ask about the incident on the 97th floor? On a clear day, Wim was running around the village, breathless with exhaustion. From a distance, Haida Marie silently observed Wim and recorded her observations in her diary. She said that Wim wasn't drinking enough water. He might think that just matching his sweat intake was enough, but he needed to take better care of himself. Later, as Abel walked down the hallway, he discovered a notebook lying on the floor. He wondered what it was and picked up the book. As he read the book, he wondered what these calculations were about and noticed that there were some notes written in it. He said that it was about body weight. Abel noticed Wim's name was written in it and thought that perhaps the notebook belonged to him. But the content doesn't match my personal notes on body metrics. Anyway, it's probably best not to read any further. However, when Abel discovered the details in the notebook were too specific, he started to sweat and said that there was something about the notebook that made him uneasy and wondered what this section was about. At that moment, Abel saw Haida Marie looking around frantically and wondered what she was looking for that made her so panicked. Abel called out to her, and Haida Marie stepped closer, feigning surprise and saying it was a coincidence to meet him there. He asked if anything had happened and why she was breathing so heavily. But the moment she saw the diary in Abel's hand, she screamed in shock. Haida Marie shouted that it was a notebook, while Abel explained that he had just picked it up from the ground. When she asked if he had read it, Abel replied that he had only glanced at it briefly and asked if she knew who its owner was. Haida Marie became anxious and stammered, "Probably not," which confused Abel. She suddenly reached out and grabbed the notebook, saying she wanted to see it, but Abel dodged her. He began to have doubts and said that she clearly knew what the notebook was for. He went on to explain that the contents were too bizarre to be personal health records, so he didn't believe it belonged to Wim. Haida Marie reluctantly admitted that it was indeed Wim's notebook, awkwardly explaining that Wim wanted to be in his best condition when participating in the labyrinth exploration. So he had jotted down some notes to monitor his health, which might have been a bit excessive, but nothing bad about it. Abel started to walk away, saying he would return the notebook to Wim, but she quickly told him to wait. Abel's suspicions grew, and Haida Marie shouted, asking what he was suspicious of. Abel replied that nothing. It was just that she looked like she was hiding something, which made him doubt what she said. and then he secretly glanced into the notebook. In it, he read lines like, "collected today," "handkerchief," "sword hilt at 3 months old," and even the conversations between her and Wim were recorded. Abel stared at Haida Marie in astonishment and asked if this was really today's collection and if she was picking. But before he could finish his sentence, Haida Marie rushed forward, threw a gentleman's elbow at him, and begged for his forgiveness. Abel fell to the ground in pain, while Haida Marie said that as a grown woman she didn't want to resort to violence, but this time there really was no other way. She hugged her diary and added that this was a secret mission assigned to the sages, but Abel angrily shouted that it couldn't possibly be true. Haida Marie drew her weapon and told Abel not to blame her, that it was for both of their own good. Abel, frightened, told her to wait and asked what she intended to do. But Haida Marie used her memory eraser skill to erase Abel's memory and then punched him hard. Wim continued jogging in the village, and Haida Marie saw him and said it was a coincidence. She gave Wim a bottle of water and said, "Here, this is for you." Wim asked in confusion if this was for him, then said that now that she reminded him, his throat was indeed a little dry. After drinking the water, Wim thanked Haida Marie and said that he felt much clearer-headed. He felt guilty for always being helped by her, but Haida Marie told him not to overreact. If it's within her capabilities, she'll always be ready to help him anytime. When Wim was about to retort, Haida Marie interrupted him and told him not to worry, because she knew everything about him. That night, Wim was reading a book when he came across the words, "Who can prove that what they see is actually a labyrinth that exists? The levels of the labyrinth are connected only by scattered teleportation circles between them. The notion that the deeper one goes into the labyrinth, the more the surrounding space takes on a single level is entirely based on assumption." The book is attributed to fellow practitioners and is written by Dr. Hanks. Wim continued reading and thought that no matter how many times he read them, Dr. Hanks's essays always amazed him. You can feel the empathy and warmth in every word he writes, but for some reason he had never seen any of his work appear in academic journals. His theories? But suddenly he heard someone call his name, which startled him. Camilla appeared before Wim and said that he was quite bold to dare ignore her. Wim quickly apologized to Camilla, but she said it was just a joke, that he must be really engrossed in that book. Wim agreed, saying he didn't think he'd ever get his hands on a copy of Labyrinth Freak. Camilla smiled and said that she had used some of her connections to get it, and that the deal was confidential. Wim thanked Camilla profusely, and she said that if he liked it so much, then the effort to find it was well worth it. Wim thought that not many adventurers would be interested in scientific things like this, and he wondered if any members of Nacht Libelle were interested as well. Camilla then revealed that, incidentally, he had a visitor and asked if he would mind moving to the reception room. Wim replied that he was fine, and Camilla helped him up from the bed. Camilla told him to stand up and asked if he was okay. Wim replied that he was fine and thought that, despite appearances, he had actually recovered quite a bit. He recounted hearing that during the battle on the 98th floor he had pushed his body to its limits, and recalled the doctor's warning that he couldn't keep forcing his body to endure such strain. Camilla apologized for making him move rooms and explained that the visitor wouldn't likely fit into the room. Wim was surprised to hear that and asked what he meant by "can't get into the room." Camilla said that person definitely couldn't have gotten through the door. This only confused Wim further, and he asked who the visitor was. Camilla replied that the man was the president of the Adventurers Association, and he wanted to speak to him in person. At the same time, the chairman was walking down the street, much to the astonishment of passers-by, and even the dogs were barking loudly. Dominic walked beside him and quietly asked if he could somehow lessen the pressure radiating from him. The chairman, named Gothelf Knochenhauer, a clergyman who told Dominic not to ask for the impossible, was just taking a walk. At that moment, a man approached Gothelf and asked for permission, which annoyed him. The man asked if he had come to verify the rumors about Wim, and if he could ask a few questions about it. Dominic realized it was a reporter. Gothelf replied that he had nothing to say. The reporter pleaded, saying that just a few words would suffice. A headline like, "A grantor takes down a floor boss" would cause a sensation, but without verification, even the rumor wouldn't survive. Gothelf coldly reiterated that he had nothing to say. The reporter smiled and offered a bag of money, saying that he shouldn't refuse like that. He would make it worthwhile with just a word. He would ensure the association received a generous donation. Looking at the man angrily, Gothelf asked if he had heard correctly and if he thought he could bribe him. The frightened man replied that he would never do that. Gothelf called the man scum and prepared to punch him, but Dominic intervened just in time. Instead, Gothelf clapped his hands right in front of him. This created a blast of wind pressure that blew the man to the ground. This left him stunned, not understanding what had just happened. While the reporter sat trembling, Gothelf solemnly stated that before becoming president, he was a man of religion and would never turn a blind eye to sin. He asked if the gust of wind had sobered him up, and if he was a real reporter, why he lacked the courage to report on people like Minerva Akaya or Kitsune. The man trembled and nodded in agreement. Dominic commented that he should now reflect on what he had done. He had made a reporter's nose bleed, and now he was going to write an article about it. Gothelf angrily shouted that he would not write about it, and the frightened man exclaimed that he would not. Gothelf asked if he was sure and offered to treat him, but the man shouted that he was fine and would ask permission to leave. Then Gothelf apologized to Wim and thanked him for coming all the way to the reception room, while Wim stared fearfully at the man. Gothelf introduced himself as the president of the Expedition Society and said he was honored to meet them. Wim stammered in reply that the honor was his. Wim thought to himself of Gothelf Knockenhauer, wielding a massive warhammer, a living legend who had once paved the way through the labyrinth. When a person becomes a warrior priest, their physical condition changes. Their body becomes larger and stronger, second only to warriors. Gothelf fought using his physical strength while simultaneously wielding healing magic, earning him the nickname Diamond Gothelf. Gothelf asked if he could call Wim Wim Dono. This made Wim sweat, but he politely replied that of course it was. Gothelf chuckled, patted his knee, and told him not to be so tense. He had only come to thank and congratulate him on defeating the leader of the labyrinth floor. He added that there was one small thing he wanted to confirm with the boy. Wim replied that he was very grateful that Gothelf had come in person to thank him. Gothelf then said that now that Floor 98 had been explored, this was a huge step forward. As someone who had single-handedly defeated the floor's leader, it would be unacceptable if he didn't come to pay his respects. He asserted that Wim had done a very good job. Wim was confused and asked again, "Alone? What do you mean? Didn't the entire Naklibel group take down the leader of that floor together?" Gothelf burst into hearty laughter and exclaimed that now he understood. Wim was indeed the person Camilla had described. He managed to make the floor leader change state and then took it down himself. For him, Camilla, and everyone else in Nachtlibe, it was no different than Wim defeating the monster all by himself. All that remained was for Wim to accept it. Wim quietly suggested that he thought there might have been a mistake, but Gothelf insisted that there was no error at all and that he should accept it. Then, Gothelf changed the subject and announced that he wanted to discuss the upcoming awards ceremony during the Festival of the Crossing. Wim would be invited to attend the ceremony and receive his reward. Gothelf explained that the Festival of the Crossing of the Realm was Virbrand's biggest festival, held whenever a floor leader was defeated and a path to a new floor was opened. This is the highest honor an adventurer can receive. This is unprecedented, but since this event takes place right after the 97th floor is explored, they will hold a festival for both floors at the same time. Gothelf added that this could be the biggest festival in Virbrand's history. It could even be called extraordinary, leaving Wim stunned. For the first time in years, with just 4 people, Dragonwing defeated the leader of Floor 97, and only a few months later, the leader of Floor 98 was also taken down. And the one who defeated that monster was a lone adventurer, one who had once been banished from Dragonwing. Wim listened to those words in silence, sitting still and speechless. Gothelf told Wim that it would be strange if no one noticed the connection. Perhaps by now in Virbrand, Dragonwing's defeat of the Floor 97 leader was common knowledge. Gothelf asks Wim if he knows that the Dragonwing team hasn't yet been officially approved to eliminate the floor leader. Wim wonders if that's because the application is still under review. Gothelf replied that his subordinate, Dominic, was the first to notice something was wrong, so the approval process was temporarily halted. Wim was stunned to hear that and said he was certain there were no mistakes when he wrote the report. Dominic confirmed that yes, the report was perfect. Wim then asked why it had been paused. Dominic explained that when they were investigating the area, he noticed a few anomalies. However, it was possible that these were just part of the labyrinth's natural transformation, so he couldn't investigate further at the time. But after observing Wim's reaction just now, he was certain. Because given Wim's personality, he wouldn't have recorded his achievement, considering it insignificant. Wim panicked and insisted they had misunderstood Minawansi. He was simply recording the facts. Dominic said he only wanted to confirm it with Wim. According to the report, the remaining 3 members of the team had almost taken down the boss, just a little bit more, but they ran out of energy first. Then, as the only one left capable of fighting, Wim finished off the boss. Dominic asked if that was true, and Wim confirmed it. Dominic went on to say that the day before he had pretended to be a reporter and directly asked Kronos about the battle with the boss. Dominic recalled the conversation when Kronos asked him if he wanted to inquire about the floor's boss. Kronos said that he completely destroyed it, cutting it in half, and the feeling is still in his hands to this day. Dominic informs Wim that this is Mr. Kronos' account of the battle with the floor's boss, and Wim wonders how the story ended like that. Dominic added that, unlike him, Mr. Kronos seemed to have a very high opinion of himself. Wim stammered that it was simply because Kronos liked to exaggerate a little in front of reporters. Gothelf remarked that he was certain Kronos was indeed like that. But if they had physical evidence and written reports, then ignoring it would be unacceptable. It's true that Kronos has great potential, but unfortunately his character isn't good. Wim asked what they ultimately wanted from him. Gothelf replied that it was a matter of honor to defeat a floor boss. Knowing the truth, ignoring it would be tantamount to committing a crime. Gothelf added that Wim had the right to reclaim what rightfully belonged to him. Wim thought to himself, meaning they wanted to pass on the title of conquering floor 97 to him. He was confused, not knowing what to do. He still wasn't entirely clear about his feelings for Dragonwing. If you retract the report now, then you don't want to make your relationship with them awkward. He didn't know what to do. He knew these people were just trying to help, but he didn't want to. Wim claimed that Dragonwing had defeated the boss, after which he was removed from the group and Aniclimax took him in, and they conquered floor 98. They acknowledged his efforts, so what's the problem with that? This remark startled Gothelf and Dominic, while Wim was panicked because he himself hadn't expected to blurt it out like that. He quickly apologized and explained that he was so desperate at the time that he couldn't remember what had happened. Gothelf said he understood, but that he should at least accept the honor of having conquered floor 98. Later, in the hallway, Camilla asked Gothelf how the conversation went. He replied that it was difficult to say. He asked Camilla if the boy was aware that he had defeated a floor boss. Camilla replied that if it were told to him as a fact, he would believe it. He always accepts things exactly as they are told. Gothelf remarked that the boy had absolutely no distinguishing qualities. If he had to identify him in a crowd, he wasn't sure he could find him. He looks like just an ordinary kid to him, but if he gets serious, they won't stand a chance. Camilla smiled and remarked that if he spent more time with him, he would understand. No matter how much money he had, he couldn't buy him. Gothelf replied that she had indeed placed high expectations on him. Then he turned to Dominic and told him not to get too carried away with the boy. He guessed there was no reason for him to say that. Dominic agreed that he wasn't wrong. Before Dominic could finish his sentence, Camilla interrupted and asked if he had really refused to talk about it, regarding the 97th floor. Was that right? Gothelf confirmed that it was true, but unfortunately the boy had refused. He added that the only time he felt anything for the boy was at that moment. He recalled the time Wim asked if they had a problem with that. At that moment, it was as if he had caught a glimpse of the true person inside the boy. If it were him, he began to wonder if that child could be the one who would make him take things seriously. A few days later, while Wim was still in the hospital, Abel visited Wim and said that he had left a change of clothes over there. Wim thanked him and Abel asked if he needed anything else. But Wim replied that no, everything was fine. He even felt a little embarrassed about receiving so many gifts. Abel smiled and Wim told himself that Abel visited every day. I heard that Abel volunteered to take care of him despite being so busy. Abel said he didn't know how grateful he was. Even though he'd said it 100 times, he was really cool at that moment. Wim laughed and said that he knew Abel meant well but still felt a little embarrassed. Now his only job is to lie there and entertain guests. After a while, Wim looked around at the pile of gifts and felt a little overwhelmed. He picked up a gift, mentioning that he had received so many presents and wondering who had given him this one this time. He tried to recall the name and said that there were a total of 122 members in Nacht Libelle, and if you included their families, the number would be even higher. He already had difficulty remembering people's faces, and it would be very troublesome if he couldn't match names with faces later on. Just then, a man entered Wim's room and said it was a pleasure to meet him. His name was Gregor, and he was a member of the branch of Nacht Libelle called Liber Rab. Wim went on to say that if you include the members of the branch teams, the number would be at least 1,000 people. Gregor said that Wim's recent achievements were so outstanding that even the branch office heard about them, so he came on behalf of the support team to send his greetings. Wim looked up at Gregor and thought that he didn't feel the same sense of belonging as the others in Aniclimax. Perhaps there were many more like him in the branch teams. Gregor informed Wim that although he was the captain of his team, he had only recently been appointed, and then chuckled softly. Wim felt confused and thought that this person was a familiar type of person to him. Gregor then gave Wim a gift and said, "That was enough about him. Please accept it." Wim opened the gift and was surprised to find it was money. He cried out in confusion while Gregor asked if that wasn't enough. Wim replied that he couldn't accept something like that. Gregor said it was a way of showing their gratitude, but Wim still refused, asking if accepting it would only cause trouble for Camilla. Hearing this, Gregor apologized. At that moment, he noticed a book placed next to Wim and picked it up, asking if it was Labyrinth Freak. Gregor asked if Wim was also a good reader, to which Wim replied that only a little. He added that because the book had not been officially approved by the union, some of its content was questionable, and it was best to read it with caution. Wim then asked Gregor if he had read the book as well, and expressed surprise that it was such a rare find. Gregor admits that it's a little embarrassing to say this, but he was one of the contributors to that book. About a year ago, he wrote an article titled, "Describing the Teleportation Rings, a Perspective from the Glow-in-the-Dark Painter." Wim was utterly surprised and exclaimed that he knew the piece. Although he hadn't read the previous works, he had read that particular piece before. Gregor was also surprised, not expecting Wim to know about the article. At the time, he was using the pen name Zelion. The fact that a fellow believer had appeared here struck him as miraculous, while Wim was somewhat confused, not fully understanding Gregor's meaning. Then Gregor began to leave, saying that they should talk more another time, and asking Shim to keep their conversation a secret from Camilla. Before leaving, he said goodbye. Wim smiled and wondered to himself how there could be people like that around here. On the day of his discharge, Wim left the hospital and the doctor praised him, saying he didn't expect him to recover so quickly. The doctor reminded Wim to take care of himself, and he replied that he would. As Wim walked out of the hospital, he was surprised to see Camilla waiting for him. She congratulated him on being discharged from the hospital. Wim bowed his head in apology for making her come all the way here. But Camilla said it was no trouble at all. On the contrary, they felt there were too few ways to show their respect for him. Wim looked at Camilla and thought to himself that this was the first time he had seen her in casual clothes. Camilla was embarrassed and said that she knew it was a rare sight, but if he kept staring like that, even she was starting to feel shy. Wim quickly said no. Actually, he thought the outfit suited her very well. Camilla asked in surprise if that was true, then admitted that even so, she still felt a little strange. When Wim asked about her everyday armor, Camilla said that for the past few years she had only worn armor. But lately Hans and the doctor have been constantly reminding her about it. Wim nodded and thought to himself, it made him wonder what she would wear to bed. Camilla then asked Wim to go for a walk with her, and he agreed. As they walked together, Camilla mentioned that his trial period was almost over, and asked if he had thought about officially joining Aniclimax. She also said that many other teams would soon send invitations to Wim, with very high compensation packages. At least 10,000 to 15,000 tons of milk per month. Wim was stunned to hear that, thinking she must be joking, because that figure was equivalent to the budget of a large-scale expedition. Camilla went on to say that Aniclimax was willing to pay him 20,000 for the milk, and if anyone offered a higher price, they would pay an additional 1,000. Wim, startled, called out to her to stop, and asked if she was being too generous. He felt very pleased that she appreciated him so much, but Camilla interrupted Wim and announced that she thought it was a worthwhile investment. Wim replied that he was also proud of what he had achieved, but ultimately it was all pure luck. Wim said that receiving his reward was fine, but receiving such a large sum of money each month made him uncomfortable. Camilla smiled and said that he was very bold to still maintain that attitude after single-handedly taking down a floor boss. Wim thought that perhaps, even if it was just luck, he had defeated a floor boss. But even so, this is still you. Are you capable of meeting those expectations? Camilla explained that she didn't need him to give an answer right now. Currently, he was considered a treasure of Virbron, and no one dared make an unworthy offer. But she wanted him to know that, no matter what, Aniclimax would always welcome him. She promised him that, and Wim thanked her. Camilla went on to say that this might be a little redundant, but from now on he would be interacting with many different teams. There are a few things she wants to warn him about. She said the thing she wanted him to be most careful about was the groups connected to the dark map. Virbron has its own dark side, and the scoundrels who consider it their home might target him. Wim mumbled black map repeatedly, while Camilla explained that these were illegal maps created by throwing potentially sacrificial human beings into the labyrinth. She added that there are also groups that exploit legal loopholes to exploit slave labor, groups that distribute forbidden magical items, and groups that engage in the trafficking of half-human, half-slave people. She said that Virbron is a big city, and the darkness hidden within it is far greater. Then she asked him if he had ever heard of a group called Minerva Achaya. When Wim replied that he had never heard of it, Camilla said that it proved he had been on the right path so far. But from now on, he'd better remember this name. She claimed that they were the source of all those shady transactions. Whenever a team is cornered, or when naive youngsters seek shortcuts, or anyone is driven by greed, as soon as they find someone's weakness, they strike. She said she had thought they would target him after he was discharged from the hospital, but it seems she was worrying a little too much. Wim pondered what Camilla had just said and told himself, Minerva Achaya. He absolutely had to remember that name. Meanwhile, at a bar, Kronos asked Nicker what he thinks of girl number 15. Nikor asked if she was the red-haired warrior, and when Kronos nodded, she replied that she was cute too, but wasn't sure about her strength. Kronos smiled and said that it was indeed cute. The power was a bit questionable, but at least it could liven up the team. Then he asked about girl number 6, and Nicker replied that she didn't like the way that girl looked. Sophia overheard the conversation and felt uneasy. If they continued recruiting in this manner, the least worrying thing would be a lack of coordination. She thought that if she said anything wrong, Kronos would get angry again, and everything would go back to square one. At that moment, Sophia overheard two men talking. One asked the other if he had heard about Noctlibel killing the leader of the floor. The other person responded with astonishment, saying that the speed at which they passed floor 98 was absolutely insane. The other remarked that Noctlibel was indeed not to be underestimated. Kronos also overheard the conversation and asked, Noctlibel? Then he approached the man and asked if the story was true. The other man recognized Kronos as someone from Dragonwing and replied that it was a pleasure to meet him. Kronos asked them to tell more about the story they had just told, and they hesitantly agreed. They said that there hasn't been an official announcement from the guild yet, so it's just a rumor. But in Noctlibel's recent large-scale investigation, it was said that they encountered the floor leader and took it down on the spot. This astonished Kronos, and he exclaimed, Impossible! That's impossible! Kronos added that it takes 3 years to get past floor 97, and asked if they were sure that rumor was true. Sophia recounted that Kronos had heard rumors about Wim being in Noctlibel. It seems he got in there through a friend. Kronos' rage upon discovering this was unbelievable. Then Kronos said that it was obvious to Camilla, the silver-haired girl, but Dragonwing wouldn't give up. However, before he could finish his sentence, the other men interrupted and commented that she wasn't actually the one who took down the boss. They said there was a strange rumor circulating. Kronos asked what the rumor was. They explained that the person who defeated the boss was not an official member of Noctlibel, but an adventurer who had accompanied them. Kronos, surprised, asked what they meant, whether they were allowing people from another group to join. But the other person replied that wasn't the case. That person was a temporary member, and he had taken down the floor boss all by himself. Kronos couldn't believe it and asked, What do you mean? They confirmed that it was true, a temporary member of the Noctlibel. Kronos thought to himself, defeating a floor 1 boss alone. He couldn't believe what this person was saying. It was impossible for anyone to do that. But in that moment, he thought of Wim. He angrily said that it was impossible, that they shouldn't be messing with him. Kronos yelled that no one could solo a floor boss, and they should take back what they said as he tightened his grip around one of the men's necks. Sophia yelled at Kronos to stop because everyone was looking at him. He released the man and apologized, saying he didn't understand why he acted that way, that he had just been a little stressed lately. But at that moment, someone else spoke up, saying that Kronos had a point. While it sounds unbelievable for someone to single-handedly defeat the floor boss, it's equally unbelievable that a team of just 4 people could clear floor 97. The person also asked if their promotion review was being delayed longer than usual. Someone in the pub asked who that was, and another replied that the idiot was Daz Iron Fist, and his team had recently been promoted. I heard he once took down a golem with just his fists. Meanwhile, Kronos says it's all because their errand boy made a mistake. Daz remarked that he had heard about him, and that he seemed to be doing quite well as a temporary member of Noctlibel. Kronos replied that it didn't mean anything, that he only got accepted because he knew someone, then asked Daz what this meant, what he was trying to say. He replied that he was just saying they used to be hailed as the next big team, but now look how listless they all look. not at all like a top-tier team. Kronos said that perhaps there was something wrong with his hearing, because he had definitely said that he had been very stressed lately. The two men eavesdropping on the conversation became excited and wondered if a fight was about to break out as Daz approached Kronos. Daz suggested a fight and that Kronos call him senpai, to which Kronos replied that he must be new here and he would teach him to shut up. Meanwhile, Melis thought she just hoped this wouldn't affect their promotion prospects. When the match started, Kronos was in a dominant position, but Daz said he conceded defeat. But before he could finish his sentence, Kronos punched him and told him he should know better than to keep his mouth shut. Kronos was about to punch again, but Sophia used magic to hold his hand back and said the fight was over. The onlookers discussed who had said Kronos wasn't strong and commented that this was indeed the power of a team leader who had defeated a boss, living up to expectations. Then, Kronos approached the members of Dragonwing and apologized for being a little hot-tempered. He added that there are now some fools who believe such nonsense rumors and people are always talking about them, but that's proof that they're becoming more and more famous, so just ignore them. Nicker told him to calm down, saying that if the group slowly recovered, they would prove their capabilities to everyone. Floor 98 might have been conquered, but there were still many unexplored areas. Sophia agreed that this was true, and since they would soon be recruiting new members, the priority now was to regain their form. Kronos nodded, saying she was right. But then he reconsidered what Sophia had said and countered that, no, they were the Dragonwing. They should be the ones fighting on the front lines. He was brimming with enthusiasm, shouting that they should advance to the 99th floor where they would show everyone what happens when you anger the Dragonwing. Meanwhile, someone was lurking in the shadows, eavesdropping on their conversation. Meanwhile, Ida Marie was sitting alone, wondering if there was something wrong with the way Wim's emblem was moving. She said there were rumors that the final boss of Floor 98 had been defeated, and the entire full brown group was celebrating. This was a golden opportunity for many other groups to safely explore the Floor 98 area. As for Wim, rumors are spreading like wildfire, with dozens of people trying to tarnish his reputation before the Adventurers Association issues an official statement. Haida Marie said that while Wim was working for the Society of Sages, he would sometimes show up in town, spending a lot of time in cafes and bars. Annoyed, she wondered who it was, then angrily concluded that this was extremely suspicious. Really, really suspicious if you asked her. Later, Haida Marie secretly followed Wim and recounted that on a certain day of the month, at 2:28 p.m., Wim went out but wasn't wearing his usual jacket containing the eavesdropping device. She said that his actions were drawing attention from others. Then she felt uneasy, wondering what was going on, why it was so secretive. And there was a woman involved. As she lay on the rooftop watching, she whispered to herself that no way. He couldn't possibly have any friends other than her. But then she thought about the others in his group, especially Abel, who had become excessively close to Wim lately. She angrily said that this guy had no respect for boundaries and shouldn't be close to anyone other than her. Meanwhile, Haida Marie hid in a corner and thought that the simply dressed woman didn't seem suspicious. It was probably just an invitation from another group. The attire was simple, but she couldn't rule out the possibility it was a woman. However, at that moment, she noticed someone was following Wim and wondered if that woman was stalking him. Immediately, she used ice magic to stop the other person and then rushed forward. She screamed that it was a stalker. Upon arriving, she tackled the woman to the ground and asked which group she belonged to and what she intended to do with her Wim. She added that the other person's taste was quite interesting, and she would admit that. But then the other man suddenly called her Haida Marie and told her she was mistaken. It was him, Abel. Haida Marie was shocked to recognize him and asked why he was chasing Wim. Abel stammered in reply that he wanted to imitate Wim, which confused Haida Marie, who asked what he meant. He said anxiously that he couldn't stop thinking about Wim when they faced the floor boss, so he wants to become like him. Wim is truly amazing. Haida Marie agreed and happily added that Wim looked really cool for doing it. Abel said that it seemed like she really understood. Then she asked Abel, so why did that make you chase after Wim? Abel replied that he wanted to learn Wim's movements, thinking that perhaps Wim saw a world that only he could see, even while doing all the other things. And if he didn't see that, perhaps he wouldn't be able to reach that level. After listening to Abel, Haida Marie commented that she understood. He was just a stalker. She was about to hand him over to the military police, but Abel begged her to wait a little longer. He justified his actions by saying he knew he had gone a little overboard, that it was his first time venturing so far into the city, and asked for leniency. She coldly replied that there's nothing wrong with admiring someone, and it can even become a source of motivation. But she angrily added that he needed to know his limits and shouldn't invade other people's privacy. And then there's that terrifying laugh you just used. You're not usually like that. Abel admitted that he did it on purpose, that he was just imitating Whim. She immediately yelled at him to stop. Then she said that since it was the first time, she would let it slide, but there wouldn't be a second time. Then she turned and walked away, telling him to go home because she had work to do. While Abel knelt on the ground, he asked why she was following Whim. Marie blushed at this and stammered that she was only keeping an eye on Whim to make sure he wasn't being drawn into other groups. Abel looked at her suspiciously, which angered Marie, who asked him what he was looking at, but he replied that he was looking at nothing. Suddenly she screamed, "Oh no! Because of Abel, I've lost track of Whim. I have to find him quickly." Meanwhile, Whim arrived at the cafe and thanked someone for waiting. The woman in the black hat replied that it was all right. She had just arrived herself. She asked him what he would like to drink. From a distance, Abel and Marie were watching them through the window. Abel remarked that it was a woman, and a very beautiful one at that. Marie snapped at him, telling him not to talk nonsense, that Whim wouldn't be interested in that kind of woman. She grabbed Abel's shirt and shook him violently, screaming in disbelief that this was happening and not knowing what to do. She glanced inside the cafe and exclaimed that Whim drinks coffee without sugar or milk, then wondered when he'd started skipping sugar and milk. She angrily told him not to try to act so mature and mysterious. Abel advised her to calm down. But he also admitted that Whim turned out to be more discreet than he had imagined. While Marie told Abel to deny it, Abel glanced at Whim and the girl and asked what was in the paper bag. Marie also noticed the bag and then recognized the woman when she lowered her hat. She gasped in astonishment, exclaiming that it was a long-eared female elf. Abel asked if she knew her, and Marie shouted that it was Kronos' woman. Meanwhile, Whim was speaking and explaining that he had previously been tasked with managing Dragonwing's finances, but completing the transfer process without guidance was impossible. He apologized for getting caught up in complicated procedures and consequently running into her a few times. However, Sophia replied that it was all her fault, that she was truly sorry, although he probably didn't want anything to do with her anymore. Whim replied that it wasn't the case, and in his heart he thought that after talking to Sophia, he realized she was a very intelligent person. He had previously thought she joined the group simply out of interest in Kronos, but it seemed her reasons were far more practical. Whim then explained that the gold vein there was shared with other groups, and Sophia asked in return they would provide recovery medications not listed in the property register. Whim agreed. He thought Sophia always grasped things very quickly, and sadly recalled Kronos' criticism that he didn't know how to explain things clearly. Then Whim told Sophia that it might be okay if they met again, and she agreed and thanked him. She admitted that she had unilaterally caused him trouble, but Whim told her not to worry. He felt that with this person he could trust that everything would be all right, and he wondered to himself if he still cared about dragon wings anymore. As Sophia was about to leave, Whim called her back and mentioned the monster on the 97th floor. This prompted Sophia to ask if there was a problem. Whim replied that there might be some objections, but he believed it would eventually be passed, so she shouldn't worry too much. He cheerfully added that they would be able to sustain themselves for a while solely on the rewards from monster hunting missions, and advised her not to act recklessly. Whim then apologized for not having brought up the subject with her, since after all he was just someone who had been kicked out of the group. As Sophia left the cafe, she told herself that she didn't think she could replace Whim, but she would try her best. Meanwhile, Abel and Marie were walking down the street, and Abel asked if it was really a good idea to withdraw midway like that. Marie replied that she was just Kronos' woman, so there was nothing between her and Whim. She smiled and added that they had also set a 3-hour limit on physical contact, but before she could finish her sentence, Abel questioned what she meant. He asked if she was a close friend of Whim's, and Marie nodded in confirmation, saying they had been friends since childhood. Abel was stunned to hear this and asked why she would do things like spying on others and why she couldn't just talk to Whim directly. The question saddened Marie, who replied that there were many reasons, then asked him to keep it a secret. Abel hesitated but agreed. Meanwhile, Whim sat alone, thinking that he had no intention of bringing up the past with dragon wings. He just hopes they succeed in the future. That's enough for him. Now, you need to focus on yourself, on where you stand in the future. There's only one choice you have to make. Join Aniclimax. There should be no other option. Almost none. A few days later, Camilla remarked that things had finally improved when she reviewed the report submitted by Wim. Wim breathed a sigh of relief, and Camilla asked if he was very tired. This reminded him of the time she had asked him about that report. That he should redo it because defeating the Floor Lord was his own achievement, and that he shouldn't be so modest. Now, she says she wants to hear the answer to the question left unanswered last time. Wim thought it was strange. Even though he knew exactly what he should say, there was something inside him that prevented him from speaking. Camilla asked him if he wanted to join Aniclimax, emphasizing that this wasn't a formal request. If you feel the conditions aren't right, you can withdraw at any time. All the preparations can wait. For now, just relax and tell her how you feel. Wim thought that this indecisiveness always bothered him, so he really wanted to change, to fix this distorted version of himself, so that he can genuinely laugh with everyone in Aniclimax. He definitely wants to do that. This is a great opportunity. Meanwhile, Camilla was impatiently thinking that if he was going to say something, he should say it now. Then she took his hand and said that she was counting on him from now on. She then told Wim that it was time to welcome them, for now they were standing before all the members of Aniclimax. When Wim stepped onto the stage, he began to reread what he was about to say once more, without the hesitation of the members of Aniclimax. Wim began by stating that once again, he was Wim Strauss, and he would do his best, hoping for their support. The crowd cheered excitedly after Wim's speech, everyone happily congratulating each other, chanting, "Let's help each other," and it's time to celebrate because they had just defeated the floor boss monster. Now, the real battle begins, the battle to explore and conquer that floor. It's ironic that the Aniclimax members, having defeated the floor boss monster, are yet to reap the benefits of that victory. The association issued an official announcement acknowledging the monster's defeat after its members recovered. The large-scale expedition led by Aniclimax officially commenced. During this period, many small units were established to be more efficient in mapping and topographic surveying. Wim began to wonder who he would be working with this time, and whether he would get along with a new person, but he immediately dismissed it. He was a member of Aniclimax, he had to be proactive and clear-headed. Wim confidently introduced himself. "I'm Wim Strauss, I'll do my best not to be a burden, and I hope everyone will help me." He felt very happy that he didn't stammer this time. Meanwhile, Bettina seemed a little confused, saying that it appeared to be the first time they had worked together. This made Wim wonder if she was Bettina. At that point, Abel reminded him that they had actually worked together before. Wim apologized, saying it wasn't his fault for forgetting, but Bettina told him not to worry, as she was a discreet person. Wim immediately denied it, saying he was just distracted by something else, but he still clearly remembered that they had once been in the same study group. At that time, Camilla announced that everyone needed to stay in constant contact and absolutely not let their guard down, even though the floor boss was no longer around. Everyone agreed with her. Camilla went on to mention that a large monster was lurking at the bend ahead, and asked Wim if he knew its distance and type. Wim answered yes, and he thought to himself that he couldn't wallow in sadness forever. He had to focus on the mission. He explained that their team was a high-speed survey team. This mission was very important, and he decided to give Bettina a gift. Wim then spotted a wyvern 25 meters ahead, likely a Class C creature. Suddenly, he felt something very strange and immediately rushed off. He thought to himself that if he used the rocks he could kick, 3 bounces would be enough to reach the monster's neck. Its weak point. Wim told himself that it was okay. He could do it. Then he told Camilla that they had encountered a wyvern and asked permission to attack. But Camilla urged him to avoid fighting and just get past her. Wim sadly thought, well, that worked, but began to wonder why he felt that way. Camilla recounted that thanks to Wim, the land reclamation process progressed much faster. A girl gave her a piece of meat to eat, and as Camilla chewed, she thought that there was no denying Wim was very talented, but the problem was how she should use him. She recalled telling Wim that she wanted to learn more about his grant abilities before he officially joined, including how he fought the floor boss and how replicant he could have been. Camilla commented that, of course, she was willing to share everything she could. Then she continued to think that after receiving a more detailed explanation from Wim, she was certain of one thing. Wim was a genius. While Wim was explaining everything, Camilla replied that she understood, and asked Wim if the main risks when applying it to others were just muscle fatigue and soreness, right? Then she asked what would happen if he applied it to himself, and it failed. Wim replied that it would depend on the situation, but overall that area will be damaged. During the battle with the floor boss, he received a brain boost, so it's highly likely that he received a simultaneous boost. Camilla was confused after hearing this and asked what would happen if the grant failed. Wim replied that it would be the same. That area would be injured, and at best, it would cause unconsciousness. Camilla wondered if it was okay, while Wim said it was dangerous and that all he did was survive by sheer luck. But Camilla thought that he couldn't possibly have accomplished such extraordinary things just through luck. Clearly, Wim was underestimating his true abilities. She wondered if Wim was really risking his life. But just then, someone shouted an emergency alert. Simon reported that there were 2 large ones in front and 1 behind, so they still had a way to retreat. But if they continued like this, they would be surrounded. Camilla ordered a retreat first and then rejoined the main team. She thought about the 3 large monsters and concluded that Wim was probably strong enough to take down those of a certain size. She then contacted Wim via communication channels and relayed the orders. Later, a member reported that they had killed 1 wyvern, but another wyvern and a chimera were still alive. Camilla asked Wim if he could handle it, and when he agreed, she began giving instructions. But before she could finish her sentence, Wim used his ability and attacked Chimera. After delivering the blow, Wim began to wonder why he had used the Puppeteer Master skill. Because what you did last time went beyond your limits. From a safety standpoint, you shouldn't have used it. A single second could cost him his life. He wondered why he used it. Was it to meet everyone's expectations, or perhaps that was the case? He thought that perhaps it was best not to think about this now. After Wim defeated the monsters, Camilla rushed over and remarked that he had just used a brain-enhancing skill. She apologized, saying she hadn't expected him to use it to that extent, but Wim replied that he seemed to be doing better than he expected, that he was improving. Camilla said that was fine, but asked him not to act recklessly again, and Wim smiled and agreed. Afterward, everyone gathered in front of a building and cheered to congratulate Wim. One person in the crowd asked if it was Wim Strauss. Another old man wondered if it was really the boy who had defeated the boss monster. He couldn't believe it. They continued pointing and asking if the large man was able. Meanwhile, Wim wondered to himself if they were talking about him. People were saying he looked quite shy, and they wondered if he was really a member of Aniclimax. Hearing this, Wim inwardly affirmed that they were right. As a member of Aniclimax, he had to change. He should stand tall and show confidence. Then Heidi Mari appeared from behind, startling Wim. She stood with the others, and one of them formally welcomed him to the team, saying that they were now teammates, to which Wim happily agreed. Hidemari remarked that there was actually no need to rush his discharge, which surprised Wim. She added that it was okay if the visits made him uncomfortable. Then she asked about how Wim used his puppeteer skill, specifically whether he was activating the area near the pituitary gland to increase his healing ability, which surprised Wim, who asked how she knew. Hidemari simply commented that it was definitely not okay. She asked him if he liked everyone at Aniclimax. Wim answered yes, prompting her to happily comment that it was a relief. But she wondered if she had made the right decision in inviting him to join Aniclimax. She felt incredibly frustrated that she couldn't hear what he was thinking. It was truly irritating. At Dragon Wings, Sophia announced that this time, the group had officially received approval to take down the boss monster on floor 97. Kronos complained that it had taken too long, but now they were safe, while Melis breathed a sigh of relief and said, "What a relief." Sophia began by saying that the atmosphere in Dragon Wings had been terrible lately. In the city, everyone was talking about the Aniclimax group and about Wim. Everyone knew that Wim had once been expelled from the Dragon Wings. She had to admit that even while still in the group, she realized they lacked the ability to defeat the boss monsters. In other words, that's probably the actual situation. She wasn't sure of the exact details, but it was clear that Wim's presence played a crucial role in defeating the boss monster. Sophia concluded by stating that this was the reward for defeating the floor boss: 500,000 mercs. Nikor was surprised by the sheer number of zeros. Sophia said that to withdraw the check, she needed the leader's magical seal, and Kronos told her to handle that and then give her the key. Sophia secretly thought that entrusting such an important task to a newcomer was a test of trust. She began to contemplate the future. Kronos then declared that with this money they had become a truly top-tier team, both in terms of titles and actual strength. Sophia wondered if he really had no intention of resigning, then recalled Wim's suggestion. She asked Kronos why, now that they had ample resources, they didn't try exploring floor 98 first. They could guarantee a profit now, but Kronos adamantly refused, saying they had to attack and conquer floor 99. He shouted that they were a high-level team, and they had to always be at the forefront. While everyone else was caught up in immediate desires, they would move forward. They are Dragon Wings. Meanwhile, Sophia thought this was reckless. It seemed they were trying to quell a spreading rumor in society. They weren't even admitting the truth that Wim had single-handedly taken down the boss, angrily saying, "That's obviously a lie, don't be fooled." She thought about Kronos, that this man was trying to prove something, that on the 99th floor they could demonstrate true power. She reported that Dragonwings had recruited 48 more adventurers, bringing their total to 52. To advance to the front lines, maintaining efficient mobility between teleportation gates is paramount. Large teams like Nachtli controlled and maintained both the teleportation gates and the passageways. She had even heard that they used secret teleportation gates to gain an advantage in exploring the labyrinth. But Dragonwings didn't have that advantage. They had to overcome challenging areas to progress to the 98th floor. Half of the new members who joined were let go. Kronos then declared that the journey officially began from this point. Sophia began to wonder if the remaining members were truly elite adventurers with extensive experience, as their overall skill level was still not very high. Kronos told everyone to get ready, and from here was the deepest part of the labyrinth. They were all now members of the Dragonwings, so don't be afraid, because he will always be there. They should be united. He said he could see it, the admiration of the people. After this labyrinth raid is over, there will be congratulations. He told everyone to get ready to go up to the 99th floor. Then, Dragonwings arrived at the 99th floor. Sophia complained about the heat, while the person next to her asked where they were. Some people wonder if there's really a sky above and whether they're actually in a labyrinth, because this place is completely different from the previous floors. Kronos smiled as he looked at the scene and said that, finally, on a floor no one had ever set foot on before, he had arrived. He said they had reached the deepest part of the labyrinth, a historic feat. He told the team members that what they needed was mutual trust. They should communicate and cooperate closely. At that moment, a member raised their hand and asked to wait a moment. Kronos recognized the person as Rebecca and asked what was wrong. Rebecca replied that she had remained silent until now, but how could they possibly reach an agreement? Shouldn't they be using some kind of communication magic to reach such a large number of people? But Kronos replied that their group didn't need magic communication. They had always communicated directly through spoken words. This confused Rebecca, who realized they were now a large group, and asked Kronos what their strategy would be from here, as this was an unexplored area. Kronos thought for a moment and then replied that he already had a strategy. He told Melis to set the forest on fire. Melis chanted a spell, declaring that with her approval the flame would be eternal, then cast a fire-breathing spell that incinerated the forest. She commented that the area was now completely dry, and Nikor said that they could now proceed safely. One girl was stunned by the power of the magic and exclaimed that it was extraordinary, truly a high-level group. The person next to her said that he had never seen magic on such a scale. Kronos stated that on the previous levels they had to be careful when using fire magic due to the limited oxygen. But here they had the sky. He told everyone to take Melis as an example and quickly clear the forests. He was full of enthusiasm, ordering the fire to be set ablaze, because wild animals dislike fire and neither do monsters. So let's use the fire to our advantage. Shortly afterward, Rebecca told Sophia that she was sorry, but she would be withdrawing. She asked Sophia to tell the captain that she didn't need the reward. Then she asked if Kronos really believed that monsters and wild beasts were the same thing. Sophia couldn't argue against it. While it was true that most monsters feared fire, the strongest ones possessed superior intelligence and endurance. Rebecca told Sophia to look. They were getting closer, then remarked that she thought Sophia was a pretty good person, so it would be best to leave this group as soon as possible. Sophia thought she couldn't just leave the group again, but life was paramount. She stammered when she saw a monster approaching and exclaimed that it was a monster. One member shouted that it was a humanoid figure. It was approaching, and it seemed unaffected by the flames. The remaining people began to panic, constantly asking where the enemy was, what they should do, and requesting directions. Sophia remarked in a panic that the situation was very bad and everyone was confused. She ordered them to temporarily form a defensive formation with their teammates providing cover behind them, a move that Kronos agreed to, declaring he would protect everyone. Sophia realized they were surrounded on all sides, making retreat extremely difficult. Upon seeing the monkey-like monsters, Kronos remarked that they were primate-like creatures, a new species. Then the group heard a strange sound. Sophia wondered if it was some kind of music and ritual, but she began to feel frightened because everything was so ostentatious. At that moment, Kronos gave a strange laugh and shouted that it was all right. They were the first to set foot in this place. All members of Dragonwings turned their gaze towards a newly appeared monster. This made Melis ask who it was. Even just its breath was enough to make the air heavy. Sophia trembled at the creature's intense pressure, while Kronos excitedly asked if it was the leader of the lair. He smiled, declaring he would show his true strength and unleash his wind-slash attack on the monster. But Sophia shouted a warning that it would be futile. However, as Kronos lunged to attack the monster, it instantly appeared behind him in a flash. Kronos turned around in astonishment, realizing the monster was mocking him, but before he could react, it clawed at his face with its sharp talons, causing Kronos to fall to the ground unconscious. Sophia immediately realized they had absolutely no chance of winning. This was the floor leader they were up against. The remaining members were deeply shocked and panicked, asking each other what was happening and why Kronos was behaving this way. Some even said they couldn't do anything, their legs trembling so much they couldn't stand. At that moment, the remaining monsters burst into laughter and slowly advanced towards their group. Sophia knew they needed to act quickly. She immediately ordered everyone to retreat behind her, while the members screamed in pain under the monster's onslaught. The next day, when Kronos woke up, he asked where they were. A hooded man asked if he had woken up yet. Kronos asked the man who he was and if this was a hospital. The man nodded in confirmation and said that they were the ones who had brought him here. He said that, unfortunately, the leader of Floor 99 had defeated the other members. Some were seriously injured, some went missing, and some were killed. Kronos shouted that it was a lie, that it couldn't be true, and asked what was really going on. What about Melis, Nisari, and Sophia? The man replied that the three were still alive, which reassured him somewhat. Hearing this, Kronos gradually calmed down. The other man went on to say that, though unfortunate, the disaster that befell strong men like him was the fate of those who dared to venture into the deepest part of the labyrinth. Despite the casualties, it cannot be denied that the exploration of Floor 99 has made significant progress. Kronos, bewildered, asked who he really was. The man replied that they held Mr. Kronos in high regard and wanted to offer him assistance. Kronos was puzzled to hear that, and the other man explained that even talented people might not be able to reach their full potential due to differences in environment or information. And this time was a prime example. Conversely, sometimes a person without exceptional talent or ability can, through sheer luck, reveal their strength. He asked Kronos if he remembered, and when Kronos told him to continue, the man nodded and apologized for not introducing himself. "My name is Garyon. It's a pleasure to meet Kronos." Later, another man saw a person in a cloak walking alone down the street and wondered if they were a member of the Dragon Wing. He and his friends started throwing stones at the person, forcing them to run away. It turned out to be Sophia. She began recounting that the victims were killed in the disaster on the 99th floor of the Dragon Wing, and the rumor that they had once defeated the boss on floor 97 was increasingly doubted. Many people began to resent them. When they got home, Nicker anxiously asked if she was all right. Sophia replied that she was fine, but remarked that given the current situation, they couldn't even go out to buy groceries. She said that rumors would fade with time, and she went on to say that people always rejoiced or mourned upon hearing news of the success or failure of explorers. But this time, everything went downhill uncontrollably. A woman asked what they were going to do now, but Sophia remained silent and did not answer. Just then, Kronos appeared at the door, causing Nikor and Melis to rush over to ask him what had happened and whether he had been discharged from the hospital. Sophia thought to herself that perhaps Kronos had truly learned his lesson this time. Nikor burst into tears, and Kronos apologized, saying he hoped he hadn't scared them. Sophia thought that the ruler of the 99th floor had clearly shown them the power disparity between him and them, so defeat was inevitable. Kronos apologized for the young people who lost their lives, even though they had prepared themselves for it. And he claimed it was all their fault. It was bad luck, but despite everything, they survived even when facing a stranger. This wasn't a miracle or coincidence, it was a power that astonished Sophia. He said that if they could show their true potential, they would succeed. So he declared, "Let me try again. This time, I will succeed." He would make it happen. They would stand side by side again. Sophia noticed something unusual in his eyes and wondered how he could have such a look. Meanwhile, the man outside chuckled. Meanwhile, Wim and the members of Nachtlibel are in a cave containing a secret treasure. One person happily remarked that he really enjoyed the upgrades Wim was making, even wondering if he could continue working without them. Another agreed, saying it was fantastic. Suddenly, Simon warned them to be careful because there was a huge monster ahead. He asked the commander what to do, and Camilla ordered 2 men to advance. Wim excitedly urged Haida Marie to charge with him. Together they attacked the monster head-on and destroyed it in the blink of an eye. The other members cheered with delight and commented that this was the power of childhood friendship, working together so seamlessly. Marie asked Wim what he thought of them, whether they were a good team. Wim thought that 3 months had passed since they defeated the boss on floor 98. The investigation into the 98th floor is also nearing its end. As the group walked through the cave, Marie smiled and remarked that they were finally reaching the bottom. Wim wondered just how deep it was. He nodded and added that it was unbelievable how they just kept going down. Mark noticed this and asked what was wrong. Wim replied that nothing was wrong. He was just wondering how far he could dig. Mark was astonished to hear that. Then he laughed loudly and said that Wim's way of expressing himself was interesting, and he didn't know what Wim really thought about the maze. They then reached the bottom of the cave and discovered a treasure that was glowing throughout the hall, astonishing everyone. Camilla announced that there are 2 teleportation gates here, so it can be confirmed that this is the treasure room. She went on to announce that the gentleman had finally arrived, the treasure chamber. They had actually reached it. The treasure chamber is a secret passage within the labyrinth, where it is said the door only opens after defeating the Lord of the Labyrinth. This is where the greatest treasures in the labyrinth are kept, along with a 99th floor teleportation station, different from the one that appears after defeating the Rank Lord. It is also said that there is another teleportation route that shortens the journey. Wim exclaimed in astonishment. This was the treasure room he had never set foot in before. He said it was beautiful while Marie stood speechless, her eyes wide with wonder at the treasures shining brightly. Mark laughed and remarked that he rarely saw her like this, her eyes sparkling like a child's. She angrily denied it and explained that she had always been like that. Wim chuckled at her reaction. He thought it had been a long time since he'd seen this side of her, a woman who always carried within her a fierce spirit of adventure. Camilla stated that in any case, she still didn't know how to reach the teleportation station. At that moment, Marie unexpectedly grabbed Wim's hand and told him to come with her. After saying that, she immediately jumped down, dragging Wim along with her, causing him to panic as they both fell from a great height. But as they were falling, Wim happily exclaimed that the view was beautiful. They both fell into an underground lake below. Marie then pointed to the sky above and asked Wim if it was beautiful, and he nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Mark was standing on the other side of the water with Abel, and he told them that they had startled everyone by jumping in so suddenly. Mark then grabbed Abel by the neck and told him not to get in their way, leaving Abel confused and unsure of what was happening. Then Marie exclaimed, "How impressive! That light is from adamantium, and over there is mithril." Wim laughed at her excitement and said it had been a long time since he'd seen Marie like that. That made her feel embarrassed. She confessed that perhaps it was because now her dream was coming true. They were going on an adventure together. Wim suddenly remembered that they had talked about this before. He had never forgotten it, but it was as if he had left it far away, only remaining as a memory. And she remained the same. Still the girl who had introduced him to Full Brown, the girl full of a thirst for adventure. Meanwhile, Camilla announced that after deciphering the text, she discovered one portal leading to the 99th floor, and another connecting to the 27th floor. She said it was a huge shortcut and suggested they should keep the treasure a secret. Wim worriedly thought that behind this teleportation station was floor 99. He felt he needed to stop thinking so much about the future and focus on his current work. Lately, his mind has been filled with crazy thoughts and he's feeling a bit tired. Just then, Camilla called him and said that they had gotten this far thanks to him. Wim was about to retort but stopped himself. He thought that everyone appreciated his work, so it would be impolite to refuse. Finally, he smiled, thanked her, and said that he would do his best to continue contributing in the future. Camilla replied that she was counting on him. He was Nachtliebel's trump card. Wim thought that the pressure on his shoulders came from the responsibility that came with the position, and he's ready to shoulder that burden alone. Nachtliebel is where he belongs. He needs to become a real person and be proud of himself, of how people have treated him. He has to do what's right. That's why he can't let himself be swayed by voices like these.